Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Fixer by T.E. Woods, narrated by Christina Delane. Chapter 1. The prospect sat in the hot tub, fat and doughy, looking like he would leave an oil slick as he melted in the steaming water. The fixer crossed the redwood deck, dropped a robe, climbed down 3 steps, and sat across from the sweating mound of flesh. "You Martin?" The prospect's mouth flapped up and down. No words. A 300-pound manatee gurgling as the whirlpool teased bubbles around his hairy C-cup breasts. "I asked if you're Martin." The fat man scanned the pool area. 2 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon at an airport conference hotel. The fixer knew the place would be empty, perfect for sensitive conversations. Martin brought his hands to his face, 2 pink hams rubbing water out of his eyes.
"Graham? You're Graham?"
The fixer nodded. A slow smile crossed the fat man's face.
"You're not what I expected."
"Yeah, I get that a lot." Yellow teeth peeked out between Martin's fleshy lips.
"I like your tattoo. A dagger through the heart. Nice for your line of work. What I don't like is meeting in a jacuzzi."
He leaned his arms across the back of the tub, a porcine crucifix.
"What's the deal?"
"Bathing suits and hot water. Great for making sure no one's wearing a wire."
"I get it. Brings whole new meaning to the term wet work."
"You have a job for me, Mr. Martin." The prospect craned his fat head, scanning the pool area again, assuring himself no one was within earshot.
"My wife."
"What about your wife, Mr. Martin?" He fidgeted.
"What, I gotta say it? That how this works?"
The fixer stared at him. Steel blue eyes shut down any resistance the obese man may have considered.
"I want her gone, okay?"
He swiped a hand through thinning brown hair.
"I need her gone."
"Tell me why, Mr. Martin."
"What? You got standards?"
Martin regretted the challenge the moment it left his lips.
"Sorry, that was rude. You're a professional, I respect that. It's just you gotta understand."
He made a failed attempt at humble.
"It's not like I do this every day, you know what I'm saying?"
"Tell me why, Mr. Martin. Why do you want your wife gone?" The size of the man made his subservience all the more pitiful. This was the fixer's favorite part, when the prospect realized who held the power.
"She's become a liability, let's just say. Spends my money like a sailor on shore leave. She's drunk every day by 3. She used to be gorgeous, but I gotta face it. She's really let herself go. My business, I need a looker on my arm."
"Why not divorce her, Mr. Martin?" The prospect narrowed his eyes, considering another stab at defiance. The fixer's steadiness stopped it. The smell of chlorine mixed with his sweat to produce an odor of sanitized panic.
"It's complicated. Let's leave it at that."
"Which means there's money involved. Money a judge might think she deserves, but you don't want her to have."
"It's not just the money. It's a whole thing. Like I said, complicated."
"Which means there's another woman. Someone who doesn't want to wait through a messy divorce." Martin found a sliver of backbone somewhere in his lipid insulation.
"Listen, I don't gotta explain myself to you. You gonna do this thing or not?"
The fixer's hand toyed with the bubbles. "No, Mr. Martin, I'm not. I do have standards, and you don't meet them." Rising and grabbing the rail, the fixer climbed the stairs and reached for a robe.
"What the fuck is this?"
Martin attempted to stand, but slipped, sending a chemically treated tsunami over the fixer's feet. Relax, Mr. Martin. Robe tied tight. I have colleagues whose criteria aren't as high as mine. Consider this a first interview. The good news is you made it to the next round. Be here tomorrow. Same time. Same tub. My colleague will meet you. Name's Kane. I think the two of you will make perfect partners.
What is this? You got the rep, Graham. Who the fuck's Kane? I need you, not some dumb fuck associate of yours.
The fixer looked down at the floating flesh flailing in the spa. One more word, Mr. Martin, and Kane takes another job. Are we clear? Martin sank back onto the hot tub bench.
Tell that Kane of yours I want to do business.
The fixer smiled and headed toward the locker room. A quick shower and change before heading home. Special attention to scrubbing off the heart and dagger tattoo. A long walk to the far end of the hotel's parking lot. The fixer pulled out a prepaid cell phone, fitted a small voice digitizer over the mouthpiece, and punched in a number. An answer on the second ring. West Grove Station, Officer Jenkins speaking. Detective Laird, please. Officer Jenkins reacted to the synthesized voice. Who is this? Put me through to Detective Laird. I won't ask again, officer. A brief pause followed by a click signaled Officer Jenkins had weighed her options well.
Laird, homicide.
Detective Laird, listen carefully. The fixer knew the digitizer sometimes garbled sounds. Have a plainclothes meet a man at the airport Hilton tomorrow afternoon at 2. His name's Martin. He'll be the fattest guy your man's ever seen, and he'll be waiting in the hot tub.
Who the hell is this?
The digitizer attracted that question a lot. Listen to me, detective, and save a life. Ignore me, and you'll have a homicide on your hands. Martin's looking for somebody, wants his wife dead, and is ready to pay to make it happen. Tomorrow, 2 o'clock, hot tub at the airport Hilton. He'll be expecting a shooter named Kane. Laird offered a variation on the theme.
What the fuck is this?
This, detective, is a guaranteed heads up. I've done my job. Now do yours. The fixer clicked off. Digitizer removed and returned to pocket. Prepaid's battery ejected. Crossing the parking lot back to the hotel, the fixer passed several cars with windows open to the July heat. Cell phone mechanism placed under the tire of a 6-year-old Ford. Cell phone battery tossed into the open dumpster behind the coffee shop. Never breaking stride, the fixer moved through the lobby and out the main entrance, nodding to the nearest bellman past the revolving door. Cab, please. Airport. The bellman whistled the first car in the taxi line forward. The fixer stepped to the open door and handed the bellman a 5 before settling into the back seat. 2 doormen and 3 bellhops watched the cab pull away. That, breathed the 20-year-old bellhop, is one gorgeous woman. Chapter 2. Lydia Corriger crossed the hardwood floors of the converted dime store on Capitol Way, pleased to see the barista behind the counter. Lydia could judge a latte's quality by picking up the cup. She liked them light, filled with foam, and the blue-eyed, shaggy-haired man so rarely on duty made them just right. Decaf, 2% with 2 pumps of honey. His smile was warm as she approached. I like consistency in a woman. Lydia pulled a $5 bill from her pocket. She stopped every morning at the same coffee shop, and the staff knew she didn't expect change. She stepped to the pickup area and mentally ran through her calendar while the milk steamer filled the room with a comforting whir. She had a light day. 1 patient in the morning, 3 more scattered throughout the afternoon. With any luck, she'd be home before 5. She had a deposit bag in her purse. If she hurried, she could get to the bank before Jefe Maldonado arrived for his 10 o'clock appointment. "I'll bet you have a name." The barista capped her to-go cup. "I'd love to know you as something other than latte with honey. I'm Oliver Bain." He set down the cup and offered her his hand. "I own the joint." The cuffs of his long-sleeved shirt were rolled twice. Lydia imagined he kept them clear of roasters and steamers that way. His arms were tanned, unusual for Olympia. Lydia wondered where he got his sun. She shook his hand. "You make a great cup." She took her latte and retrieved her briefcase. "I appreciate it." "Jefe?" The tall Hispanic man stood on 2 aluminum crutches, moving more slowly than usual. "Back bothering you?" She motioned toward the recliner opposite her desk. "Want the lazy boy today?"
"I am good. Thank you, Dr. Corriger."
Jefe had arrived in Washington 2 years earlier, up from a dusty backwater 70 miles south of Juarez. The only English he'd brought with him was, "Yes, boss." He was eager to make his fortunes following the crops: apples, soybeans, lettuce, onions, Yakima, Moses Lake, Ellensburg, Walla Walla. He'd been in Yelm, unloading a flatbed of pumpkins at the end of a 20-hour day, when an exhausted tractor driver backed up and left him with 6 cracked vertebrae and 1 broken hip. Excellent surgeries were followed by medieval rehab in a filthy hellhole that warehoused him as long as the charity dollars held up.
"My therapist is working me hard. I tell her to go fight the terrorists, she is so strong."
Jefe smiled through his pain.
"But I am walking now, so it's good."
Lydia settled onto the sofa. "Eastview is working well for you, then?"
"Ah, Madre de Dios, Dr. Corriger. You did not see the other. I was there for a year. It was no good. Bad food, dirty sheets, no help. Now I am in Eastview less than 1 month, and I am walking. I tell my wife not to worry. She can expect paychecks again soon."
Lydia reached for her notebook. "Last week we talked about how you wanted to kill the farmer who hired you. What are your thoughts today?" Jefe's face hardened.
"Bastardo."
He raised 1 crutch.
"For $3 an hour I sacrificed my legs. I cannot work. I cannot send money to my home."
"I hear your anger, Jefe. But if you go after that man, you'll end up in jail. How will you help your family then?" Jefe leaned forward, his words cold and hard.
"I will give them the greatest gift."
He winced in pain.
"Justicia."
At 2 o'clock sharp, Lydia opened her waiting room door to greet a new patient. Savannah Samuels stood at the window, gnawing a cuticle. Shoulder-length hair, expertly cut with sharp angles, so shiny black it gleamed blue in the afternoon light. Creamy skin, smooth as Dresden china. $300 jeans and a soft silk shirt, Prada shoulder bag matching knee-high leather boots, Burberry trench draped over her arm. Savannah looked up. Delicate cheekbones and chin gave her face an air of elegant fragility. Blue eyes, framed by thick, dark lashes, telegraphed a silent sadness. Lydia put on a gentle smile and ushered her into her office. "You look just how I knew you would," Savannah said. "You've imagined what I look like?" Lydia watched her newest patient settle onto the sofa and tried to interpret the wistful expression on her face. "Do I pass inspection?" "You look fine." Savannah shifted into a mask of businesslike cordiality. "It's good to see you. Lydia sat in a chair opposite her and began her routine orientation to the confidential nature of therapy. "I'm not worried about confidences, Dr. Corriger. Is that what I should call you?" Savannah's voice hummed with a slight accent Lydia found familiar, but couldn't quite place. "Would you be more comfortable calling me something else?" "A question answered with a question. How very expected. Will I always be able to anticipate what you'll say next?" Lydia had long ago grown weary of power dances. "Were you expecting me to ask what has you so frightened you're being immediately confrontational?" Savannah sat still. A slight smile crossed her pillowed lips. "Now, there you go, Dr. Corriger. I wasn't expecting that at all. Well played." "Is that what we're doing, Savannah? Playing?" Lydia didn't wait for an answer. "Tell me why you're not worried about keeping our work confidential." Savannah drew a deep breath and exhaled slowly as she glanced around the room. She crossed her long legs and leaned back in the chair. "It won't matter one way or the other what you tell to whom. Everything I say will be lies." Her voice was a world-weary monotone. Lydia was intrigued with this new step. "How do you expect that to help?" Savannah fixed her sapphire eyes on her therapist. "Everything I tell you will be lies, but all of it will be true. You'll be able to figure it out, Doctor. I've read every article you've written. I know about the awards. You've always been able to figure out a way to help people, and you'll do it again for me." Lydia's impatience was rising. "Why would I enter into such an arrangement, Savannah? Therapy is predicated on trust." "Trust is earned, Dr. Corriger." Savannah's voice took on a hostile edge. "And you already have mine." Her tone softened. "I need you. There's something broken in me. I need you to fix it." Diagnostic impressions clicked through Lydia's mind. Savannah was intriguing. Lydia wondered if she was a good enough psychologist to break through her defenses. "Why don't we finish this session before deciding if this is a good match?" Lydia offered. "How does that sound to you?" Something like hope brightened Savannah's face. She nodded. Lydia reached for her notepad and pen. "Why don't we start with what you think is broken?" Savannah tucked her hair behind a perfect shell of an ear. "No notes, please, Dr. Corriger. No chart, either. There's to be no record of my being here." "Savannah, to make this work, we're going to have to respect one another's needs." Lydia's irritation returned. "I'm required to keep a chart on every patient I see." "But I'm paying you in cash. Can't we just keep this between us?" "No. I'll call you any name you like, and perhaps I'll even listen to your lies as we try to reach the truth. But I'll not jeopardize my license for you." Lydia watched Savannah weigh her options. "Can you tell me the bare minimum you have to keep in your charts?" "Of course. Your name, the date, your diagnosis, length of session, brief description of what we worked on." Lydia sensed Savannah's anxiety. "I can keep it vague." Savannah pulled her bottom lip under her teeth. Lydia knew she was slipping away. "Tell you what, I can dispense with notes in session, but I must have a chart. Fair?" Savannah straightened in her seat and nodded, a scared child recognizing her impotence. "Maybe this is our first opportunity to learn we can trust each other," Lydia said. Savannah nodded again. "Like I said, you already have my trust." "Good." Lydia tossed her notepad and pen to the floor. "Now, tell me what you think is so fundamentally broken." Savannah's subtle flinch suggested she didn't know what string in the chaotic tapestry of her life to tug first. Lydia watched her take a shaky breath, swallow hard, and fold her hands in her lap. "I've grown into a bad person, Dr. Corriger. Quite possibly the worst you'll ever meet." Lydia wondered if Savannah had any idea how pedestrian her self-assessment was. She'd worked with scores of patients who held that same belief, part and parcel of the danger of self-awareness. Stare at yourself long enough, and you'll meet the monster inside. Shall we take a look at that? A weary disappointment crossed Savannah's perfect face. "You're going to ask me what evidence exists that I'm the worst person in the world. Then you'll ask me what evidence disputes my belief. Then you'll convince me to listen to all the alternatives and see myself in a new, balanced light. Is that your plan, Dr. Corriger?" "You've been through therapy before." Lydia added narcissist and passive-aggressive to her list of potential diagnoses. "I've been through it all, Doctor. Name a therapy and I've tried it." "Then what are you looking for, Savannah? What do you want from me?" Savannah flinched. "I want you to make me feel safe again. What's missing in me? I do terrible things, and I don't care. I don't feel guilty. I don't second-guess. I'm cold. Flat." Lydia knew this might be her only session with Savannah, so she pressed hard. "I see sheer terror in your eyes. You don't like your life, and you're scared to death it's never going to change. That's not cold. That's not flat. You've gone to great lengths to research my background. That's not the work of someone who doesn't care. You've told me you've developed a wonderful story to simultaneously show and hide the truth. That's certainly not the work of someone who doesn't second-guess themselves or feel guilty." Lydia leaned forward, arms crossed over her knees, inches from her patient. She inhaled Savannah's perfume. Roses wrapped in money. "Please tell me what terrible things you do, and we'll see what we can figure out." Savannah sat motionless. "Another opportunity to trust each other," she whispered. Lydia nodded. "Try me, Savannah." Savannah paused before sliding her sleeve to check her Rolex. "I see our time is up. Isn't that what you're supposed to say?" "We have time." Lydia was intrigued by the new steps Savannah offered and wasn't ready for the dance to end. "Perhaps next time, Dr. Corriger." Savannah stood and reached for her purse, a raven-haired goddess regaining her celestial stature after a brief romp with a mortal. She pulled $300 bills from her wallet and held them out to Lydia. "It was wonderful seeing you." Lydia sensed there was no way to keep Savannah engaged. "My intake rate is $275. Let me get your change." "There's no need." Savannah folded her Burberry over her arm. "Consider it compensation for my eccentricities." Lydia crossed to her desk and pulled 2 10s and a 5 from a small box inside the top drawer. "I'm not your manicurist, Savannah. I don't accept tips." "Oh, dear, have I offended you?" Savannah brushed a piece of lint off her shoulder. "Do you see what I mean about doing awful things and not caring?" Lydia ignored the bait. "Would you like another appointment?" Savannah crossed to the door and looked back over her shoulder. "I have some traveling coming up. I don't know when I'll be back." She crossed through the waiting room and hesitated. When she turned, her voice was soft. "I'll call Dr. Corriger. I promise." Lydia's afternoon finished on schedule. She pulled paperwork together, stuffed her briefcase, and locked her office door at 4:15. Her drive home took less than 20 minutes. She stayed on surface streets, avoiding the freeway that could have saved her time. She turned into her driveway and drove the 100 yards to her house. She stepped out of her car and breathed in the salty air of Puget Sound. Lydia entered her front door, dropped her briefcase, and crossed directly through her living room to the deck. The sun was still long from setting, bathing the water of Dana Passage in shimmering silver. Anderson Island lay like a sleeping dragon in the middle distance. Farther out, the Olympic Mountains gleamed white and gray against a dazzling sky. From where Lydia stood, she could pretend there was no one else in the world. The haunting cry of seagulls welcomed her home. Lydia headed toward galvanized tin buckets behind the garage. She opened one, pulled out 4 cobs of corn, kicked off her sandals, and crossed her back lawn, reveling in the freedom of toes in soft grass. A tall oak tree, unusual for the Pacific Northwest, stood solitary guard 30 feet away. Lydia cracked the corn cobs, tossed the pieces around the tree's roots, and retreated several steps. "Come and get it, boys." The dense leaves shook above her. She smiled as 4 squirrels, frisky despite the warmth of the August afternoon, danced down the trunk, threw her fearless glances, and pounced on the corn. Lydia crossed back to the deck and carried the smaller bucket to bird feeders nestled among bushes and perennials. She scooped seed into tubes and trays, checked the water level in 2 bird baths, and made sure a suet carrier was full. An eagle riding an air current over the passage distracted her. It hovered there, suspended 50 feet above the water's surface, but just a few yards above her line of sight. No wings flapped, no head turned, perfectly positioned to surf the invisible force, impervious to danger, looking for its next kill. She went inside and made dinner. Baked potato, broccoli, breast of chicken. A dinner guaranteed not to add an ounce to her 5'7", 130-pound, 36-year-old body. Lydia set the dining room table, lit 2 candles, and ate while the setting sun turned the mountains first pink, then blue. By the time she finished washing her dishes, the view disappeared into inky emptiness, as the night clouds blocked any starlight. 9 o'clock. Lydia went to her bedroom and exchanged her jersey skirt and white cotton tank for gray sweatpants and a t-shirt. She laced on her running shoes, pulled her light brown hair into a ponytail, and headed downstairs. 20 minutes on the treadmill, 20 minutes with free weights, 20 minutes with the heavy bag. A long shower later, Lydia was in bed, trying to relax by concentrating on an image of a white sheet billowing on a clothesline, drifting, waving. In her mind's eye, the white sheet began to bleed. A spot of red in one corner, oozing now, covering the fabric, weighing it against the breeze, finally sodden and heavy. Lydia snapped her eyes open. She threw off the covers and marched into the kitchen. She pulled 2 ice cubes from the freezer, 1 in each fist. "Hold them," she told herself. "Tight. Feel the pain as the ice freezes the flesh of the palm. Focus. The pain will bring relief." Chapter 3. Morton Andrew Grant placed the bucket of yellow chrysanthemums in front of his wife's tombstone. Edie always wanted her mums as early in the season as possible, her signal that the University of Washington Huskies would start another football season. He'd brought her a bunch home exactly 1 year ago. Mort remembered how her eyes had lit up when she discovered the 2 opening game tickets tied to a stem. She'd kissed him and danced through the kitchen waving them over her head. He'd left her celebration and gone upstairs to change. Less than 15 minutes. Strip off the sport coat, hang up the trousers, pull off the tie, put away the gun, toss the dress shirt into the hamper, pull on a pair of sweatpants and reach for his Cougar's shirt, just to tease her. Hell, probably more like 10 minutes. He bounced down the stairs humming the Huskies' fight song and smelling Edie's spaghetti sauce. They'd make it a good evening, he remembered thinking. They deserved one. She was on the kitchen floor, grandmother's big sauce spoon in one hand, tickets in the other. Mort stood frozen, unable to comprehend. A heartbeat later, his cop instincts kicked in, fingers to her neck, praying for a pulse, calling her name as he lunged for the phone, puffing into her mouth, pumping on her chest. Footsteps on the porch. Paramedics loading his wife of 35 years onto a gurney. The endless ride to the hospital. The physician walking toward him, sad eyes, shaking head, trying to explain what an aneurysm was. Mort squeezed the bridge of his nose and brought himself back. It had been the longest and worst year of his life. He didn't want to revisit its inception. "How you doing, baby girl?" His eyes scanned the words on the black granite slab. Edith Swanson Grant, beloved wife and mother. Go Dogs. Her dates of birth and death were noted below her eternal salute to the Huskies. Mort focused on the dash that separated them. 56 years, most spent with him. An action shot of Edie rushing into freshman orientation 37 autumns ago ran through his memory. She was late. One of the few vacant seats was next to his. She hurried down the aisle, slid in, and gave him the once-over. "You look as lost as I feel," she said. They were married 2 years later. "You remember the ruckus we caused, baby?" Mort touched the rough edges of the tombstone. "Your mother said I'd ruin your life. Mine said you'd do the same for me." His eyes went back to the headstone, to the dash between the dates. Countless nights in each other's arms, fighting as though the holiness of Christ depended on the outcome. 2 kids, scraping the money together so she could rent a rundown storefront on 4th Avenue, turning it into the best dance school in King County. The problems with Allie. The pride with Robbie. 2 grandkids. "You filled your dash up good, kiddo," he said. "I miss you like crazy." He blew her a kiss and walked out of the garden of death. Chapter 4. Gordon Holloway flew in 2 days earlier, looking for a break from the clusterfuck that had become his life. A place away from the lawyers and holier-than-thou politicians screaming to any bouffant hairdo with a microphone, demanding his head on a stick. He wanted to shake the bloodsucker's stench off his skin, find a way to fix things. Gordon knew he was flying solo. That goddamned board of directors he so carefully put in place had abandoned him at the first hiccup. He wanted to throw them all against a wall and enlighten them as to what a special breed of spineless asshole they were. Eager as hell to stand next to him while he was building the company, winking and nodding as bankers put together jumbo loans secured by promises and a 3-color prospectus, lining their pockets with stock windfalls based on whispers shared while sipping his top-shelf liquor. First sign of a dust-up, and they all hopped on their moral high horse, rode out of Dodge, and left him holding the bag. He considered his investors another subspecies of pond scum larva. They all loved old Gordon when he was promising 9% and returning 11%. Couldn't get their money to him fast enough, begging him to take their retirement accounts and grandchildren's college funds. Their only question was, "Where's my next dividend check?" Elbowing each other for a chance to smile into the camera, standing next to the man with the Midas touch. Did they really think their hands were cleaner than his? He could have made it work. They just came at him too fast. With a little more time, he could have raised the money he needed to keep the party rolling. But the cowards balked at the first whiff of trouble. Brought the regulators in before he had a chance to line things up. That got the politicians' attention, which dragged the media in. And that was all she wrote. 18 months ago, it was chartered jets, private islands, and blowjobs from Vogue cover girls. Now it was depositions, grand juries, and frozen assets. They could all go fuck themselves. He told his wife and his lawyer he was headed to Palm Beach, but he snuck a little farther south. 10 days of sun and surf, and a little time to chart his next move. No one knew about this place, not even his wife. Gordon bought it 18 years ago, before the rock stars and eco tourists got busy turning Costa Rica into just another roadside attraction. He owned 1,200 feet of sandy coastline, 2,000 acres, 6 miles to the nearest village. Today he could get 300 for each dollar he'd paid back then. Gordon buried his ownership so deep in nested companies, he was sure he'd be able to hang on to his piece of heaven, even if the stateside scavengers got a chance to pick his bones. Over the years, he'd quietly improved the property. A small house 200 feet off the beach, and a larger home deep in the jungle. 1 dirt road in, solar generator, freshwater well. Nothing as elegant as his Palm Beach house or his Park Avenue duplex. More rugged than his place in Vail. This was a place where a man could hear his thoughts. Away from the motherfuckers waiting to castrate him. Gordon spent his first 2 days alone, hiking and thinking, swimming and planning. The jungle humidity sweated the worry out of him. The coastal beauty fueled his genius. He'd figure out how to spin this. He'd be on top again. Hell, maybe he'd even work a deal to get some of that money the feds were handing out like samples of Sam's Club tuna. He felt brand new. It was time to celebrate. Gordon was heading for the bar of the most expensive hotel in Papagayo when he spotted her. 2 Louis Vuitton bags next to a pair of alabaster legs that looked like the stairway to heaven as they climbed from silver sandals to a white silk mini 2 centimeters short of illegal. Strawberry blonde hair caught in a clasp at the nape of her neck before cascading halfway down her slender back. Black tank top revealing perfectly toned arms. The kind of arms Gordon imagined pinning down before doing any number of wet and wicked things. He wanted to see her face. If she looked half as good up front, he'd have to change his plans for dining alone. He walked up to the counter as the manager placed a key in the beautiful woman's hand. She turned and flashed him a polite smile. Eyes the color of an Irish valley. Pale pink lips, ivory skin, 1 deep purple brush of color on the side of her neck. A birthmark. 1 flaw accentuating her perfection. "These 2 bags, please." She looked down at her luggage. The hotel manager began to speak, but Gordon cut him off with a wink. "No problem, boss. I got this one."
The elevators are this way, madam. Gordon picked up her bags. What floor?
6, room 642.
She entered the elevator, turned, and faced the doors. Gordon was impressed such a gorgeous woman ignored the floor-to-ceiling mirrors on 3 sides of the car. He pressed 6 on the keypad. She stared straight ahead, silent. He traced her profile with his eyes. Firm jaw, graceful neck, upturned nose dusted with freckles. He breathed deeply and inhaled her scent. Lilacs in spring. The elevator glided to a stop and she stepped off and aside, waiting to follow him. Gordon looked to his right and then to his left, hoping for a hint of direction to room 642.
"Are you lost?" she asked.
Definitely American. Gordon heard the clear clip of the Midwest.
"Room 642's got to be around here somewhere."
Gordon took her humor as permission to play. One would think, wouldn't one? The beautiful woman blinked at his haughty retort, and for the first time really looked at him. Tan silk trousers, exquisitely tailored linen jacket. She brought a hand to her lovely mouth and wrinkled her brow.
"Oh, my God! You're not the bellman, are you?"
She spun around and looked at him again, sheepish grin, twinkling eyes. Gordon was charmed by her embarrassment. "I'm a good Samaritan, here to help a woman in need." He bowed his head. "Now, which way?" Her laugh was tinkling wind chimes in a soft summer breeze.
"Please," she said, "leave the bags. I'm so sorry for my blunder. I can take it from here."
"Wouldn't hear of it. I leave no job half done." Gordon smiled, the same smile that inspired thousands of investors to reach for their wallets. "First time in Papagayo?" She hesitated, looked down at her feet, and sighed before answering.
"First time in Costa Rica, actually."
Gordon heard the note of sadness. "Traveling alone?" The woman ran her lovely green eyes over him. When she spoke, Gordon knew he'd passed inspection. The hook was set.
"I am," she said.
He held her gaze and softened his tone. Time to reel her in. "Then may I ask you to join me for a drink? The bar here is quite remarkable." She considered for a few heartbeats before smiling.
"Is this part of your bellman's duty?"
Gordon transferred both bags to his left hand and reached for her arm with his right. "Oh, yes, ma'am." He led her down the hallway. "This is a full-service hotel." Drinks led to lobster and salad on the dining room terrace. He learned the beautiful woman was Anna, a gallery owner from St. Louis. He pretended to be Alex, an attorney from Fort Lauderdale. They passed the evening discussing art and books and travel. They discovered a mutual love of William Faulkner and Lyle Lovett. She told him she recently ended her engagement to a dentist she'd dated since her freshman year at Brown. He told her he'd never been married. They finished their bottle of Pinot Grigio with the chocolate mousse. By the time Irish coffee was served, they both knew her room would be their next stop. Gordon was enjoying the buzz, naked in her queen-sized bed, reflecting on his amazing ability to get what he wanted. Yes, sir, he thought. Things are going to turn out just fine. He grinned as he stretched against the cool white cotton sheets and waited for Anna to join him. She stepped out of the bathroom, ambled across the room, and dimmed the lights. She wore a floor-length black gown, gossamer sheer, with wisps of lace masquerading as thong and bra. Her hair tumbled free. Gordon reminded himself to breathe. She crossed to the foot of the bed and stood, letting him examine her.
Come here." He patted a spot beside him. "Hush." Anna began to sway. "It's been a long time since the dentist." She ran her right hand slowly from her shoulder to her hip. "Do you mind if I play a bit?" Gordon felt his erection growing as he stared. He swallowed hard and tried to find his voice. "Baby, you do what you gotta do." Anna moved to unheard music. Gordon imagined a gentle samba. He pulled himself up and sat against the headboard, not wanting to miss a minute of her show. He'd play Alex from Fort Lauderdale more often if it got him this kind of action. The wholesomeness of Anna's earlier smile was replaced with an expression of pure seduction. Her hands traced slow circles around her barely covered breasts. "You like to watch?" Gordon pulled the sheet back. "Take a look at this," he said. "What do you think?" Anna tossed her head back and smiled. "I think I feel naughty tonight. Can you handle me?" If his luck got any better, Gordon thought, he'd start pissing solid gold. He wrapped a hand around the shaft of his penis. "Baby, I think the question is, can you handle this? Now, come here." Anna gave a little giggle. "Not just yet." She crossed to the bureau and pulled 4 long strips of red silk from her overnight case. "Watch me, Alex," she whispered. "Watch what I can do." Anna glided toward him and used the silk strips as partners in her dance. Gordon was mesmerized. His erotic ballerina teased the ribbons across her body as she floated closer to the bed. She bent one perfect leg and leaned next to him. He reached for her, but she turned just outside his grasp. With a smile that was part promise, part dare, she tied a ribbon around his left wrist, ran it through her fingers, and secured the opposite end to the wooden slat of the headboard. "So it's going to be like this, is it?" Gordon scooted to a full sitting position. "I'm to be your slave?" Anna strolled around to his right, never taking her glorious green eyes off him. "You'll be totally at my mercy," she teased as she secured his right arm to the headboard. I like the sound of that. Will you be gentle with me?" Gordon watched as Anna tickled his feet with the remaining 2 ribbons before tying his ankles to the bedstand. She stepped back to examine her handiwork. "You like to be the boss, huh?" Gordon whispered. "Remember, fair's fair. My turn next." Anna stopped her carnal dance. She stood at the foot of the bed appraising her captive. The sexy tease that glowed from her eyes hardened into a calculated stare. "Hey, just play, right?" Gordon asked. "I'm not into that S&M stuff." Anna stood silent. Gordon tugged with his right arm, then his left. Realizing his effort only tightened the silk, he felt a small quake of fear and flexed his legs. The knots pulled tight around his ankles. Anna reached forward and snapped the sheet off the bed with one powerful stroke. "Okay, baby, game's over. Untie me now." Gordon's attempt at authority fell as flat as his disappearing erection. He jerked and pulled, flailed and kicked, cursed and spat. Anna stood mute, watching Gordon exhaust himself. In less than 5 minutes he was spent, a gasping, naked specimen mounted to her display board. She shook her head slowly. I would have expected more fight from you, Gordon. His throat tightened.
What did you call me?
Anna crossed to the suite's window. She drank in the moonlight glistening across the water before she turned to sit gracefully in the rattan rocker. Everyone knows you, Gordon. The Wizard of Wall Street. She huffed out a small laugh. You've been in all the papers. Gordon moved to wipe the bead of sweat rolling down his cheek, only to be reminded of his vulnerable position.
Who are you? What do you want?
I'm someone people hire when they need something fixed. Her posture and tone lent an authority more appropriate to a power suit than a negligee.
Hired? You're a hooker? Is that what this is? Setting me up with pictures for tomorrow's front page?
Gordon craned his head around the room, looking for a photographer. He wished he had the sheet back. Or his erection. If he was going to be plastered across the web, at least he could cast a long shadow. Anna shook her head, a weary teacher impatient with her witless pupil. I need you to listen to me, Gordon. Listen very carefully.
No, you listen to me, you cunt. Cut me loose. Tell me who hired you. And maybe I won't call the cops, how's that?
You're going to die tonight, Gordon. Anna's voice held as much emotion as if she were telling him the time.
Untie me, now, Anna, or whoever the fuck you are.
I said you're going to die tonight, Gordon. And you have a choice. You can listen, so you understand the particulars of your death sentence. Or you can go to your grave as ignorant as you are arrogant. Gordon stopped protesting. He felt his tongue swell. It was hard to breathe. Everything about the beautiful Anna, her tone, her words, the way she held her body, convinced him she meant what she said. The back of his throat filled with the bitter, metallic taste of terror. He shivered, wishing he could free his arms and legs enough to curl up for warmth.
I have money. More than anyone knows. Name your price.
I have my price, Gordon. Your wife made the deposit yesterday. Anna rose, crossed back to her overnight case, and pulled out another long ribbon. This one black. She sat on the bed's edge, weaving the black silk dreamily through perfectly manicured hands. Gordon was sweating now, chills replaced by hot flashes of fear.
Celeste sent you. Why?
The fixer responded with a satisfied smile. Now, Gordon, you really don't see how this is necessary? How dying is the only way to fix things?
But I am fixing things, damn it!
Gordon struggled to stay in a sitting position. His arms ached and his back muscles screamed.
That's why I came down here, to think things through, come up with a plan. I know she's pissed at me, but I'm on it. There's no reason for this.
Ah, but there's every reason. Celeste knows how clever you are. She's had years of experience watching you spin your deceit and wriggle out of responsibility every time. You even convinced her the women you screwed so often and so openly were because she wasn't woman enough for you. The fixer tossed her strawberry blonde hair behind her shoulders. She doesn't think that anymore.
Please,
he whispered.
Please don't do this.
7 are dead, Gordon. 5 suicides of people who lost everything when they trusted you. One man shot his wife and 17-year-old daughter who had Down syndrome before turning the gun on himself. He took the money that was supposed to take care of his little girl after they died and invested it with you. And you put it straight into your own pocket.
I can't be held accountable for their weakness.
Gordon still hoped someone would believe that.
Investments come with risks, everybody knows that.
But you never had investments. You had schemes. Clever, complicated schemes with no other purpose than to make you rich.
Take my money! Give it to the lawyers and the tax man. Hell, give it to the fucking suicide prevention folks if that'll make Celeste happy. Just untie me and let me go home.
Gordon tried another futile tug on the silk that imprisoned him. Celeste knows your plans, Gordon. He stopped, struggling.
What are you talking about? What plans?
Celeste knows about your secret accounts. Over $20 million offshore waiting for you. The fixer twirled a hand in the air. And this, your secret place, well, I'm here, aren't I? Celeste knows you planned to sneak away if it looked like you were headed for jail. She knows about the new identity you've been working so hard to establish this past year. And she knows your plan to leave her humiliated, and all your investors denied the satisfaction of seeing you brought to justice. She asked me to fix things. Gordon's breathing was shallow. He heard his blood throbbing in his head.
What's that mean?
Simple. The fixer stared off into space, unfazed by the naked, sweating man struggling less than 10 inches away. Celeste emptied your bank accounts while you were feeding me lobster off your fork. She'll meet with prosecutors after your body's found. The grieving widow will cooperate fully. Nearly $3 billion of the money you stole will be returned to make whole what you've broken. Of course, the 7 who died can't be fixed. She'll have to live with that. She turned her cold stare back to Gordon. You'll be found by the maid tomorrow. The desk clerk will remember the woman you picked up tonight. The police will see this scarf tied so lovingly around your neck and come to the only conclusion that makes any sense. You died in the middle of a dangerous sex game that got tragically out of hand. She opened a drawer in the nightstand and pulled out a pencil. Gordon watched her fashion a noose of black silk, wrapping the ends around the short piece of wood.
Please,
he whispered. His bladder let loose as she turned back toward him. His bowels followed as the fixer pulled the noose over the Wizard of Wall Street's head. She was so focused on turning the pencil tighter and tighter, she never noticed the stench. Chapter 5. We got a job. Jim Davila had last used that tone when he responded to a call on Seattle's South Side. A 23-year-old meth head was high enough to believe the voices in his rotted-out mind, telling him My Little Red Caboose preschool was actually a front for Al-Qaeda, and it was his patriotic duty to burn the place to the ground. 6 kids were put in the burn unit. 1 didn't make it past the emergency room. Mort remembered how the mother of the dead little boy pounded Jim's chest over and over as she screamed out her grief. Jim stood there and took it. Yes, sir. Mort knew to pay attention to Jim when he used that tone.
Officer on scene says it's a white female. Tall, thin, brown hair. Team's out, and I'm heading over.
Mort's stomach clenched. You got an ID? Jim stepped into Mort's office and closed the door.
Couple of skateboarders found her behind a dumpster at Seattle Center. Drug rigs next to the body. No identification. Officer puts her age in the ballpark.
Mort grabbed his keys and pushed away from his desk. Jim stepped back and blocked the door.
"Why not let me go down and see what's what?" he said softly. "I'm chief of forensics. Let me earn my keep."
Mort pushed Jim aside with a silent glare.
"At least let me drive, will ya?"
Jim called to his friends receding back.
"Bruiser's already loaded."
Mort slammed the car door, and the cluster of investigators divided, forming a human hallway to the dead body sprawled on the asphalt. His eyes tracked left, then right, surveying the scene. He focused on the litter of rubber tubing, bottle caps, and syringes, deliberately averting his gaze from the corpse until he knelt beside her. He brushed back the dead woman's shoulder-length hair and exhaled. He looked up and locked eyes with Jim Davila, who stood 10 feet back, an oversized German shepherd at his side. Mort's subtle headshake was enough for his friend to know the dead woman wasn't Allie. Jim ordered Bruiser to stay, then joined the team.
"What do we have?"
Mort asked the uniformed officer closest to him. Mort and Jim were efficiently brought up to speed. 2 15-year-olds trying new jumps had spotted the dead woman's legs behind the dumpster. Jim's forensics team had bagged and labeled a blanket, 7 beer cans, and assorted drug paraphernalia. Jim scanned the area.
"We got enough litter for at least 3 or 4 fun lovers."
He walked over to the body and knelt.
"North Face jackets, leather shoes."
Jim reached his gloved finger into the front pocket of the woman's coat and pulled out several slips of paper.
"Bookstore receipt from Seattle University."
He rifled through the stack.
"Looks like she bought herself a latte at 10:37 yesterday morning."
He flipped through 2 more.
"Bingo. She has a massage and a facial scheduled for 9 o'clock tomorrow at the Olympic Spa."
Jim grinned up at his team.
"And that, children, is what we call getting lucky."
An hour later, a frightened set of parents confirmed the identity of the dumpster corpse. Tristan Hain, 29 years old, 4th-year graduate student. Her tearful mother described her daughter as a virtuoso cellist who'd twice toured Europe, playing with local symphonies. By 1 o'clock, Jim and Mort sat across an interview table from 2 of Tristan's terrified classmates. Richard Kimberly was an aspiring portrait painter who told Mort he had an aristocratic chin. Derek Suster was finishing his dissertation on the role of ritual drumming in 16th century China. Both of them looked as if they'd rather call their mommies than their lawyers, and both of them bolted for the bathroom when shown photos of Tristan's lifeless body. Derek didn't make it.
"I told you we should have stayed,"
Derek moaned to Richard before he sipped from the paper cup in his shaking hands.
"We shouldn't have left her with him."
Richard stared straight ahead and said nothing. Mort decided the look on his face was the perfect model for a portrait in self-loathing. "Tell me what happened," Mort said.
"And there's something you ought to know before you speak."
Jim nodded toward Bruiser, who sat beside him on high alert.
"He's specially trained. He can smell the phyllokenes and sweat when you're telling a lie."
Mort was always surprised at how many people bought Jim's bull. "Start at the beginning." He clicked on the recorder.
"Tristan's been our buddy since we started grad school."
Derek wiped his upper lip and glanced over at Bruiser.
"She's so brilliant. She can make you cry within 8 bars of any piece."
He looked at Richard, who kept his gaze on something no one else could see.
"But she had a wild side."
Derek described how Tristan returned from Europe extolling the wonders of heroin, said she'd tried it in Amsterdam and been flooded with creative awareness unlike any she'd ever experienced. Derek said she'd been after them for months to try it with her, assured them that if they did it correctly, there was no chance for addiction.
So you two artistic geniuses decided to pass a boring evening by shooting up a little horse? Davila asked.
It wasn't like that. Derek explained the three had been out celebrating Tristan's invitation to audition for the Seattle Symphony. Dinner in Pioneer Square. They'd had a few drinks, walked to Seattle Center, drank some beers, and smoked a little weed. We were all feeling pretty good. Derek looked over again at Richard, who sat mute and stiff. Tristan pulled out her phone and made a call. Next thing we know, some guy's there. Tristan slipped him some money, and he pulls out 3 hits of ecstasy. The frightened musician wiped his hands on his jeans and watched Bruiser's reaction. The dog held his vigilant pose. We took them. It wasn't ecstasy that killed your friend, Derek. Mort leaned forward. When did you move on to heroin? Derek shook his head and turned terrified eyes to Mort. We didn't! I swear to God, we didn't! He looked back over at Bruiser. Rich and I were enjoying the ride. Tristan and this idiot started making out, hot and heavy. I told Rich maybe we should leave, but Tristan just laughs and tells us to stay. That's when the heroin came out. Derek's eyes bounced between Mort and the dog. Rich and I freaked out. Tristan and the asshole shot up, then just sort of lolled about and giggled. It got boring. After about 20 minutes, I had to pee real bad. Rich said he'd join me. We went off to find a bathroom and decided, what the hell? We caught a cab and went home. Mort had enough interrogation experience to know when he was hearing the truth. He glanced over to Jimmy and saw the chief of forensics felt the same way. This guy who showed up, Mort said. He got a name? Derek trembled and dropped his eyes. Satan. Richard spoke for the first time. He turned his tear-stained face toward Mort. He introduced himself as Satan. A few minutes past 3, Jimmy's SUV was parked across the street from the waterfront home of Angelo Satanel. Mort sat shotgun and watched the front door of the faux Georgian McMansion. You think Junior's in there? Jimmy glanced behind to see Bruiser snoring in the back seat. He's got his own condo downtown. Mort kept his gaze on the house. He thinks he's partying, playing the street tough with the artistic types. Girl ends up overdosing on shit he provides. He panics like the pissant he is and shoves her body behind a dumpster. Mort looked back at his friend. No way he goes to his place. He heads straight to Daddy and wraps himself up in all that high-priced lawyering. Jim shook his head. Angelo's been bailing that kid's ass out since high school. Remember when Junior broke into the church to steal the communion wine? What was he, all of 14? Mort nodded. Playing the street hood ever since then. Angelo had 3 lawyers down at the courthouse before we brought him in. How about the girl he beat up 2 years ago? First time I heard him call himself Satan. Daddy had her bought off and changing her story while she was still in the emergency room. Jim clicked his teeth, and Bruiser sprang to attention. Let's go, big guy. Time to talk to the devil. The liveried maid's eyes widened when she saw Bruiser. Her hesitancy disappeared when Jim and Mort flashed their badges and asked to speak to Angelo Jr. She stepped aside, told them to wait in the entry, and scurried down the slate hall. "Look at this place, Mort." Jim spun around and took it all in. "This damned entrance is bigger than my apartment. I bet Mickey would love this." Mort kept his focus on the man walking toward them in the green velvet jogging suit. The man's smile was ice, and his eyes were steel.
"Detective Grant."
The man nodded toward Mort.
"Inspector Davila."
He tipped his chin to Jimmy and looked down to Bruiser.
"I'm unaccustomed to having animals in my home."
"We're here to see your son." Mort kept his voice even. Angelo Satanel crossed bony arms across his narrow chest.
"In regards to what?"
"Just get him," Mort said. "He's pushing 30, Angelo. He can speak for himself." Angelo held Mort's gaze. Mort imagined him considering his legal options. The few he had disappeared when Junior trotted down the stairs. 6 feet tall, 160, wearing a bulky sweater over a pair of loose khaki shorts, leather deck shoes with no socks. Mort thought the skinny, greasy-haired punk offered a poor imitation of the Prince of Darkness. Junior smiled a slimy grin. "Why, it's Officer Krupke and Detective Tweedledee. Look, Dad, they brought their little puppy."
"Shut up, Angie,"
Angelo Sr. barked.
"Say nothing."
Junior's grin left his face for a millisecond, then returned. "Is it that time of the year, officers? Time to buy tickets to the policeman's big ball? Let me get my wallet."
"I said shut the fuck up, Angie."
Angelo's tone slapped the smirk off his son's face. Mort stepped toward the only child of the most successful defense attorney in Washington state. "Where were you last night, Angie?"
"If this is in relation to a criminal investigation, I'm going to stop your questions right now."
Angelo Sr. shot his son a commanding look.
"If you've got a warrant for his arrest, let's see it. If you don't, leave."
Mort took a second step toward the son. "Beating up girlfriends not enough for you anymore. You killing them now?" Angelo Sr. turned toward Jimmy. Bruiser's growl stopped him mid-step.
"I want you two out of my house immediately."
The brilliant lawyer's face turned crimson.
"And take your damned beast with you."
"We'll leave." Mort smiled at Angelo Sr. "This time you can't help him." He turned toward the visibly shaken son. "You got spooked, Satan. You may have tried to hide her body, but you ran away too fast. You forgot to clean up." Mort put his nose 1 inch from Junior's. "This time we got DNA. Eyewitnesses, too. Daddy can't help you now."
"I'm calling the chief."
Angelo Sr. pulled out his cell while Angelo Jr. ran up the stairs. Mort and Jimmy walked out the front door. Bruiser followed. Jimmy pulled away from the curb once his dog was settled in the back. "Well, that was fun," Jimmy said. Mort flashed on the dead cellist behind the dumpster. His mind bounced to the last time he saw his daughter. He looked out the window to the warm glow of the October afternoon. "You have no idea, buddy." At 8:17 that evening, Mort threw his cell phone across his kitchen. It hit the wall beside the refrigerator and shattered onto the linoleum. Jim had called. The evidence from the dumpster crime scene had gone missing. Mort wasn't surprised when Jim told him his 2 eyewitnesses, Tristan's best buddies, Derek and Richard, had recanted their statements. Any further questions were to be directed to their attorneys. Chapter 6. Deirdre Thornton looked out the cathedral window of her inner office, watched the undergrads shuffle to class, and let her mind wander back 30 years to another campus washed in autumnal gold. She smiled at the memory of Tim Jeffrey crossing the quad on his long legs, wearing those damned plaid bell-bottoms she hated so much. She loved his thick, curly hair, and how he'd kiss her in greeting, not a care for who might be watching. Her memory flashed to long nights studying in his apartment, distracted by the delectable aromas from the Greek restaurant 1 floor below. The two of them in twisted sheets, exhausted from love-making, yet determined to stay awake to whisper promises of forever, while Marvin Gaye crooned on the stereo. She'd heard Tim was a baker now, somewhere in Massachusetts. Deirdre breathed deeply and forced her focus back to the moment. She'd made her decision, and her calendar held no room for might-have-beens. As president, she was responsible for the financial viability of a massive institution. Deirdre enjoyed tremendous success during her 4 years as president of Washington's premier university. Under her guidance, the endowment had grown nearly 60%. Research grants were up, graduate programs had become more competitive, and the basketball team, under direction of her hand-picked coach, had gone to the NCAA Final Four for the first time in a quarter-century. Some of the faculty disliked her leadership style, but she knew academics were malcontents by nature. The Board of Trustees liked her, and they were who she served. Deirdre smiled at the idyllic tableau outside her window. Life, for the most part, was damned good. Still, the sight of sweatered students and tumbling leaves could make her wistful for life as a baker's wife, especially with Bradley Wells hounding her. She'd made it her mission to increase his financial support to the university. When Deirdre was first named president, Wells gave virtually nothing to the system that provided him with the bulk of his workforce. The development office seemed intimidated by the hometown billionaire and spent their efforts groveling for whatever crumbs Wells threw their way. Deirdre worked her plan to bring him into the fold, and now Brady Wells's annual contribution to the university was in the mid-6 figures. She was grooming him to accept a seat as trustee, thereby ensuring millions of dollars in annual support. She hoped he would endow a chair, and perhaps build a state-of-the-art building for the School of Business. But Bradley Wells wanted too much in return. Deirdre knew Wells had a keen eye for money-making projects, and that eye had fallen on one of the most beloved sites at the university. 200 acres of virgin woodland along Lake Washington, home to undisturbed wildlife and vegetation, an oasis of solitude in the middle of Seattle, a place students, residents, and tourists hiked and picnicked, fished and frolicked, the fondest memory of any alum and a charming lure for recruiting new students and faculty. Wells wanted it. He promised tasteful development, marked with low-rise condominiums and high-end retail, restaurants, and entertainment, boardwalks to keep an adequate amount of water open to public access, discreet parking ramps for the thousands of people who would enter the area daily. In return for full development rights, Wells was willing to pay $75 million. She refused to even consider his offer at first. The land was too well integrated into the identity and character of the university. But Wells was persistent. His attorney visited her last week, upping the offer to $80 million. Deirdre was irritated Bradley hadn't come himself. She knew the billionaire's introduction of an intermediary was his signal that this was strictly business. He didn't care about whatever relationship she may have fantasized they'd built over the past 4 years. She also heard the quiet undercurrent of the offer as the attorney left. He said this would be Wells's final offer. If she didn't have the sale of the land on the Board of Trustees' spring agenda with her full endorsement, Wells's involvement with the university was over. A gentle knock shifted Deirdre's focus. She looked up to see Carl Snelling, her executive provost, lean his shock of red hair into her office. "Got a minute?" He walked toward her before she could answer. "There's something I want you to be the first to see." Deirdre took a seat on the silk chenille sofa that flanked her office's fireplace. She indicated an armchair, and Snelling sat down. Deirdre wondered sometimes what she'd do without her executive provost. There had been more than a little resistance when the board named a woman as president. Some in the university community had sat back and waited for her to fail. A few were openly hostile. But Carl had been at the center of university administration for nearly 20 years. He knew everyone and wasn't hesitant to share. Deirdre found his knowledge and genuine openness to her administrative style more than helpful. She appreciated his counsel, but knew his interpersonal awkwardness and perpetual demeanor of having just struggled out of a sickbed kept him from being the full partner she longed for in a provost. "You're not going to like this." Carl handed her one of 2 files he held in his lap. "Remember, shooting the messenger ended millennia ago." Deirdre opened the file and glanced at the title page. Greek. She flipped through the sheaf of papers, her brow furrowed as she read. "These are your final calculations." "Please don't consider them mine, Deirdre." Snelling held a thin hand to the side of his pale cheek. "I've been looking for a viable option for months. I like finding solutions to problems. Lord knows juggling higher education budgets in times like these gives me ample opportunity. But as to the Greek situation, the numbers, as my friends in accounting are fond of saying, don't lie." Deirdre focused on the papers. "These enrollment projections look grim. Have you spoken to Papalopoulos? What are his plans?" "I'm afraid no plans can work on the impossible." Snelling crossed one thin leg over the other. "I blame the public school system. They haven't taught the classics for decades. Surely a handful of the private preparatory academies do the right thing and teach Greek and Latin. I found myself inspired by the ancients during my own prep years at Andover. But the few students who wish to continue their studies won't attend a state university with 3 faculty members in the entire department. They prefer the Ivies." "Those 3 faculty members turn out important work. We could incorporate Greek as a subdivision of another department," Deirdre offered. "Please refer to tab 5. I've anticipated your idea and researched the possibilities." Snelling flipped his own file to the section he named. "Greek has not had a single student enrolled in 11 years. They are, quite frankly, pure overhead. There's no interest on the part of any department to take on 3 scholars who have no students and no interest in contributing to any work beyond their own. Nor would I want to be anywhere near Papalopoulos when Greek being relegated to subdivision status was discussed." He leaned forward and dropped his voice. "Would you be surprised to know he once threw a glass of ouzo in his dean's face simply because the poor man said he preferred walnut to pistachio baklava?" Deirdre pictured the passionate, barrel-chested Papalopoulos's response to Snelling suggesting his department be downsized. She'd pay $100 to watch that encounter. "Closing the department would have ramifications," she said, beyond the livelihoods of 3 noted faculty. It's the oldest department on campus. It's really all that's left of the classical character that established this university. Characters change, Deirdre. Snelling closed his file. Unless you have a secret pot of money or some other miracle, I'm afraid we must eliminate the entire department. Chapter 7. Mort walked into the Crystal Tavern just past 5:30, nodded to Mauser behind the bar, and headed toward a booth in the far corner. He sat down across from a 6'3", 200-pound black man with tightly curled graying hair. He'd been meeting L. Jackson Clark for more than 15 years. Mort made it a habit back in the day to swing into the Crystal, work a crossword puzzle, and drink 1 Guinness before heading the 4 blocks home to Edie and the kids. "I'm buying a beer for anybody who knows an 11-letter word for accident. Got an N and a D in the middle," he'd called out all those years ago. The smattering of teachers, nurses, and stay-at-home dads who made up the Crystal's afternoon clientele had nothing. Mort shook his head and tapped his pen against his newspaper. "Serendipity," a low voice called. "Fate, luck, kismet, accident, serendipity." Mort raised up on his bar stool to see who'd given him the obviously correct word. He waved the man over, bought him his beer, and thus began their weekly ritual. 5:30 every Thursday, first day of the week the New York Times crossword puzzle gets interesting. Mort reached for the Guinness waiting for him. "Sorry I'm late." His friend glanced at his watch. "I'd say 3 minutes is well within allotted grace. You look like hell. Anything you care to talk about?" Mort took a long gulp. "Just trying to figure out how I can be such a fuck-up, is all." He nodded toward the newspaper in front of his friend. "You started? I gotta get mine yet." L. Jackson Clark pulled a second copy of the Times from the seat beside him. "Here. Only 3 left when I arrived." "Thanks." Mort folded the paper to the puzzle and pulled out a pen. The 2 men worked the puzzle silently for several minutes. "The principle behind yin and yang, 46 down." Mort looked up. "Make me happy I'm sitting with a professor of religious studies, Larry." "Dualism." Larry counted letters on his fingers. "Or duality. Got a clue for the last 2 letters?" "Dualism works." Mort went back to the puzzle. "This have anything to do with that young girl found dead at Seattle Center?" Larry asked. "Close to Allie's age, wasn't she?" "She was." Mort set his paper aside and watched 2 women at the bar playing cribbage. "What would someone with your so many years of schooling call someone who let their impatience and ego interfere with what they knew was right?" Larry leaned back against the booth. "I believe the term is human." "What happened?" Mort told Larry about his failure to bring Angelo Santinel Jr. in for the death of Tristan Hayne. "I had him, Larry. All those times Daddy got him off. This time I had him. I had the DNA, the witnesses, and I shoot my mouth off before the arrest warrant was ready. My money says Angelo Sr. made 1 call, set in motion a play that took me out of the game before I even suited up." "Now, wait a minute. Surely you'll investigate what happened in that evidence room." Larry leaned in. "A blunder on your part, to be certain, but not a crime. That's on someone else." Mort shook his head. "Investigation will turn up nothing. Our team's spotless. It was some other way. Daddy's money buys the best." "So Satanel walks." Larry took a sip of beer. "Just like whoever took your Allie away."
That what's got you so angry at yourself?"
Mort exhaled long and slow.
"I don't know. I guess I was hoping for a little justice in the world. Too much?"
Larry unrolled a slow smile.
"Now you're walking in my world. Is there room in your calculus for divine justice?" He nodded toward Mort's paper. "That duality you just mentioned. Yin and yang. Good and evil. They make up a whole. Perhaps the evil this Satanel does will be met with a celestial reckoning."
Mort huffed out a laugh.
"I'm the asshole who couldn't wait for an arrest warrant. You think I have the patience for karma?" "We're a nation of laws, Mort, but we're a universe of mystery. If the law can't provide justice, what else have we but hope for a godly balancing?"
Mort's eyes hardened. "There's got to be another way." The world-renowned scholar shook his head and reached for his puzzle.
"Keep your focus on your job, my friend. The other way brings trouble."
Chapter 8. Lydia Corriger thanked the teller and walked toward the exit. She fumbled to stuff her deposit receipt into her purse and crossed paths with someone leaving the bank's side office. Steady hands closed around her arms to stop the potential collision. "Latte with honey." Oliver Bain dropped his hold once she was steady. "Fancy meeting you here." She hadn't realized he was so tall. She stepped back.
"I didn't see you." "I got that."
He crooked a thumb to the west.
"Heading my way?"
She glanced at her watch. "I've got an appointment in 10 minutes. He held the door open. "I'll walk with you." Lydia hesitated. "A walk shared is twice as nice," Oliver coaxed. "Besides, I'm 3 blocks down. How annoyed with me could you get in such a short distance?" Lydia nodded her reluctant acceptance. Her office was 2 blocks past his coffee shop. There was no way she could extricate herself without seeming rude. They stepped together onto Capitol Way. "I like walking errands, don't you?" Oliver took the street side. "Makes a person feel connected to the town." He looked down with a smile. "Like I feel more connected to my customers when I know their names." Lydia pulled her briefcase higher on her shoulder and extended her right hand. "I'm Lydia Corriger." His hand was warm. "Nice to meet you, Lydia. What brings you downtown every day?" He did a quick scan, eyes laughing. "You don't look like a state employee, too casually dressed for insurance or finance. What's your gig?" Lydia's heart quickened at his attempts to categorize her. "I'm a psychologist, private practice in the McMurray house." The light at 4th and Capitol turned red and stopped them on the corner. "The Brick Craftsman on the corner of 11th? I love that place. A shrink, huh? Much call for that in the land of sunshine and light?" His jab at Olympia's gray and gloom coaxed a small smile from her. "I keep busy." Oliver pointed to the upper floor of the 5-story building across the street. "That used to be me." She looked up. "You used to be sandstone and leaded windows?" His appreciative glance lingered a heartbeat longer on her than she liked. "No, I'm a more cedar and double pane man." He pointed up again. "That used to be my office. Oliver Bain, Associate State's Attorney. Gave up the glitz and glamour of building enough paperwork to keep bad guys' lawyers busy, and opened up an honest business." He looked down and Lydia felt tiny. "Just in case you were worried you were sharing sidewalk with an educationally inferior fellow." The light turned green. Oliver placed a light hand on the small of her back to urge her forward. She pulled aside 2 rapid steps, and he dropped his hand. They continued down the next block in silence. They stopped at the door to his shop. "You want to come in?" he asked. "I'd love to have your opinion on a new roast I'm working on." There was that slow smile again.
On the house.
His face had a weathered look she would not have associated with someone who spent years in a law library. He didn't seem bothered by the damp wind blowing hair across his eyes. She shook her head. I've got appointments. Lydia said goodbye to her 7th patient of the day at 5:30. She dreaded driving home with every state worker in Thurston County and was weighing her commuting options when she heard the front door to her office suite open.
Dr. Corriger?
A female voice called from the reception area.
Hello?
Lydia pushed away from her desk and crossed her office. Savannah Samuels smiled and looked past Lydia's shoulder.
Are you with someone? I know I don't have an appointment.
Lydia studied her unexpected visitor. Savannah's jet-black hair was shorter. She wore chinos and a soft gray flannel shirt, suede moccasins, far more comfortable than the picture of calculated chic she presented last time, but still the kind of beauty who inspires poets. You nearly missed me. What can I do for you, Savannah? The lovely woman fixed Lydia with pleading eyes.
You remember me. That's nice.
Savannah hunched her shoulders in supplication, and her flawless face assumed a pleading look.
Could you maybe see me? Now, I mean.
Lydia looked at her wristwatch.
I know it's late. Please, I'll pay extra.
Lydia raised her right eyebrow.
That's right, I forgot. I'm sorry.
Savannah offered a weak smile.
I'll pay your published fee, and not a penny more.
Lydia glanced at her watch again, remembered the traffic, and ushered her in. She settled into a chair and watched Savannah drift about her office, looking at framed diplomas and inspecting titles on her shelf. She ran her finger across a row of books.
You can tell a lot about a person by how they decorate,
she said. It's been, what? Lydia scanned her memory bank. 6 weeks, maybe 7. What brings you back?
For instance, you don't have any photographs, not on your shelves, not on your walls.
Savannah, you didn't come here to critique my decorating. Tell me what's going on. Lydia reached for her notebook, but then recalled Savannah's request for no session notes.
No photo of you shaking hands with an academic legend. No pictures of a smiling hubby or kids, not even a dog.
Savannah's blue eyes teased.
How very untrophy of you, Dr. Corriger.
Savannah, you may talk about lots of things, but you may not waste my time. Lydia's tone was gentle but unyielding.
Not even one picture from the past,
Savannah whispered.
A childhood friend. Maybe someone special.
Have a seat, please. Savannah stood still. Lydia watched her in silence. Finally, the beautiful woman sat down, rigid and straight-backed, across from her therapist.
Where should we start?
Savannah placed her canvas tote next to her feet and put her hands on her knees. Her right leg bobbed, a manic metronome beating the tempo of unrestrained anxiety. You're afraid of something. Do you know what it is? Lydia relaxed into her overstuffed chair. Model the opposite pose of a nervous patient, she reminded herself, calm and steady. Tears filled Savannah's eyes. She reached for the tissue box on the table between the two women.
Of course I know. Did you think I'd be blissfully ignorant of my demons?
Demons, are they? Lydia focused on her patient. Tell me about them. Savannah wiped her eyes and sat taller in her chair. You told me at our last visit you already trusted me. Lydia let a few more moments pass in silence. Does that still hold? Voice steady and non-judgmental. Savannah whispered.
It does. Thanks for seeing me. I know it's late.
Then let's make this time productive. Lydia needed to press, keep her patient focused. I believe you were worried about something in you being broken. Am I right? Savannah was silent for several long moments.
I hurt people, Dr. Corriger. It didn't used to bother me. Now it does.
Savannah reached for another tissue and held it in her clenched right hand. How do you hurt people? Keep the probing neutral and focused. Use the patient's own words. Build intimacy by creating the illusion she's talking to herself. Savannah blinked a tear away and stared into middle space.
Do the details matter?
I think they do. There's lots of ways we can hurt people, Lydia said. Intentional or accidental, emotional, physical, sexual, financial, consistently or at random. She watched her patient. What ways do you think you hurt people, Savannah? The beautiful woman continued her numb gaze into nothingness.
I've hurt people every way you can conceive. Let's leave it at that.
Lydia recognized self-loathing. Normalizing was the next step, but she needed specifics. What's the worst thing you've ever done? Savannah kept her eyes away from Lydia.
What's the worst thing you can imagine? Think of that. Assume I've done it.
Time for the challenge. Offer an absurd option. Lead the patient to realize her sins aren't anywhere near as corrupt as she assumes. I'd say killing someone is as bad as it gets. Raping someone. Torturing someone. Savannah's eyes were a blue Alaskan glacier, cold and unyielding.
Come on, Dr. Corriger. With what you know about me, you can do better than that.
She tossed her tissue into the wastebasket a few feet away. Lydia wondered what Savannah fantasized she knew. Let's switch gears. Maybe something less heated. What have you been up to since our last appointment? 7 weeks is a long time. Savannah focused her attention on the seam of her trousers. She traced its line with her fingernail.
I've been out of town.
Work or pleasure? Savannah slowly brought her head up.
I thought we were headed for less heated waters.
When Lydia didn't respond, Savannah's face softened.
I'm sorry, that sounded confrontational.
I'm not sure confrontational is the word. Maybe defensive, Lydia said. Tell me why such a routine question scares you.
It's not that the question scares me. I'm not used to talking about myself.
You said at our last meeting you'd tell me lies, but everything would be true. Are you wondering whether to be honest with me? Wondering if I've earned your confidence enough to be trusted with a minor detail like where you've been? Savannah smiled.
You remember that? You're really good.
Good enough to know you're dodging the question. Let's try again. What took you traveling for 7 weeks? Savannah's smile disappeared. Lydia could almost hear the decision process her beautiful and terrified patient was calculating.
Business, she finally answered. You could say it was a business trip.
Ah, where did you go? A shorter hesitation this time.
Out of the country. Someplace warm. I needed a break.
Lydia decided not to press for destination details. What is it you do for a living? I don't believe you ever mentioned it. Savannah concentrated on the tissue she was shredding.
It's hard to explain.
Try me. Vague encouragement, no pressure. Keep the patient unguarded and talking.
You could call me a freelancer and be accurate enough.
Savannah gathered the shreds of paper and wadded them into a ball. She glanced to the wastebasket, leaned back, and scored another 2-point toss. What type?
Whatever needs doing.
Savannah's voice had a clipped air of finality. She reached for her tote and stood.
Thanks for taking the time to see me. You've saved me again.
She pulled $200 bills from her hip pocket.
I looked up your web page. I take it this is a follow-up session.
I'd code it as that, Lydia answered as she stood. But follow-ups are typically 45 minutes. We've barely taken half that time. Savannah placed the bills on the coffee table.
I'm well aware I'm cutting the session short. You should be paid for your services.
I know I expect to be. She pulled her tote over her shoulder and headed for the office door. Would you like another appointment? We could schedule something for next week. Savannah pushed a stray lock of hair behind her ear and stared at her moccasins.
I'd like that very much, Dr. Corriger. I'll try to last longer.
Her voice was choked with tears.
Maybe next Wednesday.
Lydia scanned her calendar. Looks like I'm open at 9 o'clock and again at 6.
Can we say 6? Last appointment of the day?
6 o'clock it is. Lydia wrote her in. And yes, it will be my last for the day. Are you okay to drive home? Savannah nodded her lovely head.
I'm much tougher than I look, Doctor.
Lydia arrived home just before 7. She poured herself the single glass of Merlot she allowed herself every other day and walked out to her deck. She took a sip before tossing corn cobs to the squirrels and refilling the bird feeders. Dusk was well underway. She felt a small stab of melancholy for the shortening days. She spent too much time in darkness. Lydia settled into a lawn chair and took in the mountains, the islands, and the water. She listened to the screech of the hawks and the call of the seagulls. She breathed in the scent of salt and pine until the last bird sounded, and the majesty of her perfect world slipped into darkness. Chapter 9. Mort Grant tossed the sandpaper to the floor, brushed the sawdust off his hands, and reached for the ringing phone. "Hey, Dad, it's me. Good time?" "Good as any." Mort held the cordless receiver in one hand and cleared a stool of old magazines with the other. "I'm down in the shop. Thought I'd get back to those dollhouses I promised the girls. How are they? How are you?" A soft chuckle came through the line. "They're fine. They're 6 years old. How do you think I'm doing?" Mort matched his son's laugh. "Twins. Double the fun. Double the something. Hayden has decided she's tired of dressing like Hadley, and Hadley won't leave the house if she can't mirror what Hayden's wearing. Imagine the morning hilarity." Robbie's voice softened. "Down in the shop, huh? About time you got back to your hobbies." Mort hated the calendar of recovery people expected. Did his son really think that lathes and saws could erase the pain of waking up every morning without Edie? "How are things out in Denver? You running that paper yet?" "Crime beat keeps me busy enough. I'm working on a national story, though. That's always good for the career. It's why I'm calling. What's the use of having a homicide detective for a dad if you can't hit him up for help?" Mort grimaced to the empty basement. "Homicide? I thought you were doing that white-collar stuff." "I am. I'm working the Gordon Holloway story, you know it? Asshole with the Ponzi scheme. Ended up dead before the trial even started. That's the one. I'm working the local angle. Colorado investigators who lost their shorts to that bozo. But I keep hearing your voice in my head." "Yeah? What's my voice saying?" "It's about Holloway. Bastard makes like he's available to the authorities. assisting with their investigation. But when the heat turns up and it looks like his house of cards is about to collapse, Holloway takes a powder, winds up in Costa Rica, dead in some sicko sex game. I read the papers, Robbie, even articles you don't write. Mort wanted to get the dollhouse sanded and primed before supper. What's this got to do with me? I keep remembering what you'd say every time you were putting a case together, about how there's no such thing as a coincidence. Dad, Holloway was in his mid-50s, fit as a fiddle. He was also a control freak. I don't get him letting some bimbo tie him up. People can get pretty kinky in the bedroom. You don't want to know what I've seen. No one can find the girl. She checked in 2 days after Holloway lands in Costa Rica. Bellman says he's never seen her before, but swore she was a pro. I've tried to track her down. None of the locals know her. You thinking she was there for a reason? Mort forgot about the dollhouses. A lot of people lost everything they had investing with that shithead. Some deaths, even. If there was a chance Holloway could escape justice, Robbie sighed. I don't know. Maybe it's nothing. The feds aren't looking into it. But something's nagging at me. Well, if it was a hit, you're up the creek. Why's that? A hired gun's a detective's worst nightmare. Takes our 2 aces out of the game. What do you mean? Robbie sounded disappointed. No personal connection to the victim, and no motive other than a payday. Hired guns disappear into thin air. You gotta start with who might have a motive to hire him, or her. Robbie sighed. That's a cast of thousands, Dad. Then maybe things are exactly as they seem. Maybe the sex killed him and the hooker got scared and bolted. Don't go looking for trouble, no matter how juicy the story might be. Mort knew his son would ignore his advice. Tell Claire I send my love, and kiss those kids for me. Will do, Dad. I'll call you next week. Sooner, if I come up with anything. Mort hung up the phone and picked up a tack rag. He was cleaning the roof of the house meant for Hadley's dolls when he flashed on a similar design he'd built for Allie a quarter-century earlier. He tossed the rag to the floor, climbed the stairs to his empty kitchen, and poured himself 3 fingers of scotch. Chapter 10. The fixer parked in the lot of a busy Korean grocery and walked 5 blocks to a storage facility next to an abandoned railroad line. She dressed as the character the manager knew well, knowing she would be recorded on various cameras standing as false promise of security in the high-crime neighborhood. She was Paloma Petard, a late middle-aged woman who'd experienced more hard times than easy. Steel-gray streaks shot through shoulder-length hair the color of dirty dishwater. 40 pounds overweight, mud eyes, elastic waist, faux denim polyester pants, and a dirty sweatshirt that urged people to ask me about my grandkids. Navy blue canvas duffel thrown over stooped shoulders. She entered the grounds and shuffled her worn-out red sneakers across sand and weeds, walked into the office flashing a weary smile, just big enough to reveal 1 gold incisor to the man behind the desk. Hey, Paloma. Rocky was 63 but looked a decade older. He bought the rundown storage facility 9 years ago with the few bucks left after paying off gambling debts and 2 ex-wives. 38 years playing Frankie Valli in a 4 Seasons cover band at state fairs, Indian casinos, school basements, and worse left him with just enough for 40 sheet metal garages barely meeting code behind a rusting chain-link fence. He'd met Paloma when she came in to empty out the back of a Chevy station wagon held together with Bondo and duct tape. Said she'd been evicted by her son-of-a-bitch boyfriend and needed to store her stuff until the jerk calmed down enough to let her explain why she drank his last Budweiser. That was 6 years ago.
That time again, huh?
Paloma set her bag down and dug in the front pocket of her pants. She pulled out 4 wrinkled 20s and handed them over. Rocky counted out $3.16 change into her filthy hands. Paloma paid month to month, always in cash, never wanted a receipt. Rocky slipped the 4 20s into his pocket as his personal fuck you to the tax man.
Need help with anything?
He asked. Paloma threw the duffel back over her shoulder. I'm good. Just looking to change out some things is all. She headed toward her unit. See you next month, Rock.
I'll be here, Paloma.
He watched her shuffle out before turning back to his racing form, chuckling to himself about the way some people waste their lives. The fixer used her keys on Unit 29. She maneuvered around boxes of books and towels, sidestepped a stained mattress standing on end, and made her way to a cheap pine locker nearly hidden beneath stacks of blankets and record albums. She cleared access to the chest and knelt to unzip her bag. She pulled out the tools of her last job, the passport of Ana Galeta Salata, recently stamped with a tourist visa to Costa Rica, green contacts, strawberry blonde wig. She returned them to the chest, closed the lid, and replaced the camouflage of blankets and albums. She made her way around a portable television and stacked laundry baskets to a cardboard jewelry box. She opened it, and a 2-inch plastic ballerina popped up, twirling in front of a cracked mirror to the strains of "Someday My Prince Will Come." She shuffled through the contents of the cheap jewelry box, hoping for inspiration for her next character. She found it in less than 2 minutes. It went into the bag, and Paloma Petard was ready to leave. The fixer never strayed from the rules she set for herself 6 years ago. No more than 1 job per country per year. Never less than 2 months between assignments. Only when it was clear that justice couldn't or wouldn't be served would she consider a case. Her jobs rarely raised a coroner's inquest, and never a police investigation. The fixer was invisible. Her new assignment elicited a call for caution from deep within her. Costa Rica was just 6 weeks ago. The details of Gordon Holloway's erotic demise and tales of an elusive hooker kept the media circus fueled for days. But the public's appetite for fresher, fleshier, and bloodier stories from the human Colosseum soon demanded another outrage. Gordon's death was pushed off the front page by the story of a teenaged blonde kidnapped from a New Orleans mall where she'd gone to have her bikini line waxed. When her body was found in a Biloxi trailer park 4 days later, the satisfied masses shook their collective heads in smug sorrow for nearly a week, before turning their prurient peering to the tale of a single mother in Madison, Wisconsin, who drowned her young daughters to save them from the devil's claws. It wasn't the violation of her timeline that concerned the fixer. It was the location. The prospect wanted to meet at an address less than 80 miles from the fixer's home. The first contact had come a week earlier. The fixer was amused when her return call was answered with a digitized voice using the same technology she liked to use. 2 voices altered to disguise any hint of gender, age, or dialect, spoke for less than 3 minutes. Another call 2 days later confirmed the time and place for their meeting. Pier 39 on the Seattle waterfront. A location the fixer knew well. At precisely 11 o'clock, the fixer stepped from behind the dust-covered shipping crate that served as her surveillance spot. She'd been in the warehouse nearly 2 hours, hoping to gain any advantage a glimpse of her prospect's arrival might offer. But no one came. She heard no vehicle approach, No door creaked open. No flashlight broke the darkness. She'd remained hidden and watching, deep in the maze of ladders, forklifts, containers, and carts that had once been the tools of an active import-export business. The company's founder had a heart attack 3 years earlier trying to convince a longshoreman to work his crew past quitting time. Dropped dead into a shipment of canvas patio umbrellas at the age of 53. A court battle between his 2 sons left the place locked and gathering cobwebs, while their respective lawyers bled their legacy dry, waging dueling lawsuits. A spotlight snapped on before she took 3 steps. The fixer froze. She looked up and estimated the light to be 12 feet overhead. The warehouse was an impenetrable shadow outside a 3-foot circle of bright white. Her eyes tried to adjust to the glare as she willed her breathing to return to normal. She took a few slow steps. The spotlight followed her. She stopped and looked up.
"Hey, no worries, huh, buddy?" she called out. "I don't mean no harm. Just looking for a place out of the rain's all. Thought this place was deserted. I'll be on my way."
The fixer headed for the door.
"Stop where you are,"
a digitized voice blasted from unseen speakers.
"Whoa!"
She turned circles, looking up.
"You some kind of RoboCop? That's cool."
The fixer held her arms out to the side for inspection. Black leather jacket over ankle-length black velvet skirt, men's work boots, scuffed and scratched, leather gloves with silver studs, short black hair spiked and gelled. Safety pins pierced her earlobes, complemented by a delicate silver nose ring. Heavy black eye makeup accentuated pale gray eyes.
"Scan me if you want, brother. I'm clean. I got none of your crap on me, I swear. Just looking to stay dry."
She ventured another step.
"I said stop. Stand still while I figure out what to do."
The fixer smiled at the hesitancy in the electronically masked warning.
"Hey, buddy, you wouldn't be a fella named Jones, would you?"
She shielded her eyes with her gloved hands as she peered toward the rafters. The silence relaxed the fixer. She leaned against a dusty file cabinet and waited for a response.
"Are you Carr?"
the mechanical voice finally asked. "I am." The fixer saluted the light. "And I'd appreciate it if you'd turn down the spot."
"But you're a woman. I wouldn't have guessed that."
The spotlight dimmed sufficiently to end the harsh glare. "No one ever does." The fixer stepped to the center of the light. "Now let me see you."
"That's not going to happen, Ms. Carr. We'll conduct things this way if you don't mind."
Her anger flared. "We're done here, Jones. I don't do business with invisible voices." She walked to the door, her ire punctuated with every step.
"Wait!"
A man's voice came over the speaker.
"Please, don't go. I need you."
The fixer stopped, but didn't look back. "All you have to do is step out and introduce yourself. We'll take it from there."
"I'm afraid, Miss Carr. This is all very new to me."
A woman's voice over the speakers.
"Please hear me out."
"How many of you are up there?" The fixer turned to again face the light. "I came here to meet with Jones. Just Jones."
"And that's what you have. I came alone."
A child's lilt from the speakers.
"Tell me a voice you're comfortable with, Miss Carr. I can give it to you."
Curiosity pulled the fixer back a few slow steps. "What have you got up there, Jones?"
"Whose voice do you like, Miss Carr?"
A woman this time, with a thick Irish brogue.
"Try me."
The fixer stepped forward in challenge, captivated with the technology suggested. Let's hear Barbra Streisand. Nearly a minute passed in silence. The fixer wrestled an inner warning to find the nearest door and run.
"Well, hello, gorgeous."
The voice over the speaker was unmistakably Barbra Streisand's. The cadence was slowed, as if each word was pieced together from an infinite library of the diva's recordings, but the inflection and tone were perfect. Anyone over the age of 25 would be certain they were listening to the superstar. That's some gadget you got there, Jones. But I'm going to have to see you if you want this conversation to go any further.
"If you could indulge me, Ms. Carr,"
La Streisand asked.
"Please, watch this."
The light that had been tracking the fixer went dark and was replaced by the glow of a large television mounted on the side of a catwalk, above her to the right. The image of a middle-aged man filled the screen. Late 40s, she guessed. Fit, handsome, and with the body of an athlete. His face unlined, and his suit custom-tailored. He walked with the easy grace of someone who knew he turned heads. There was no audio as the man ascended to a podium. He shook hands with several people before taking his place behind a lectern. He smiled into the camera and pulled note cards from his pockets. That's Fred Bastian. The speaker now projected a man's voice. This time the accent was soft, southern. Some say he's the best in his field, maybe destined for the Nobel Prize someday. But you say different, I suppose. The fixer wanted to get to the reason for this meeting. Dr. Bastian is a butcher, Ms. Carr. A fiend. A sadist of the highest order. What is it you want, Jones? By the way, is it Miss or Mr. Jones? The fixer grew weary of the game.
Jones is fine, Miss Carr.
This time a woman with the nasal inflection of a New Jersey housewife.
Bastian is a chair of neuroscience at the university. He's built his career identifying and locating the molecular substrates of human emotions. Most of his work is with animals. Non-human primates, he calls them. He does most of his experiments on monkeys and chimpanzees.
The fixer knew of Bastian's lab. Over the years it had been the target of demonstrations by animal rights activists. She recalled an investigation by the National Institutes of Health a few years earlier. I'm listening. No need for Jones to have any indication of her knowledge of the scientist's work. What do you have in mind? The response came as a female voice from the heartland, devoid of accent as any network anchor. Bastian's lab has as many as 50 primates at any given time, caged, chained if necessary, screaming for their freedom at first, soon learning they're helpless and submitting to captivity, huddling in the corners of small crates, some starving themselves to death, but mostly succumbing to the seduction of survival and performing for their captors, who come twice a day with kibble and fruit. The television switched to another video, Bastian smiling into the camera as he gave a tour of his lab. Green porcelain tiles covered the walls. White-coated assistants stood behind black-topped utility tables. The audio was muted, but the fixer assumed Bastian was pointing out various instruments, or explaining his theories or research protocols. She watched Bastian go to a large steel door, key an entry code into an electronic panel, and push the door open. The audio blared into action as Bastian entered his holding rooms. Unseen dogs barked, monitors beeped. Bastian spoke directly to the camera with an assured voice.
And now, the stars of our little show.
The camera tracked dozens of cages that filled the sterile room. Monkeys peered out as Bastian walked by and identified them for his audience. The small macaque and tamarins, the proboscis and squirrel monkeys, several with shaved heads, 2 with implanted electrodes, faces of pleading fear, captured in heartbreaking close-up by the zoom lens.
Here are my larger specimens.
Bastian led the way to another room. 4 monkeys were in individual cages.
First, a male and female baboon.
Bastian put his hands on top of their respective cells.
They allow me to measure the hormonal contribution to emotions.
He turned away from the cowering animals and directed the camera to the final set of cages.
Meet Frost and Nixon.
Bastian smiled at the 2 captives.
Chimpanzees. 96% of their DNA held in common with humans. Very social animals in the wild. They form clans of 100 or more, like families. The information we get from them is as close to humans as possible.
The camera framed the 2 chimps, electrodes protruding from their skulls, catheters inserted into their arms and penises. Nixon held his arm out, reaching through the cage in supplication. The video went blank. The fixer took 2 deep breaths and tried to shake the images from her mind.
Okay, so Bastian's an asshole, she called up to the rafters. I don't get involved with the politics of academic research. Contact some sort of review board.
This time a woman with an aristocratic English accent.
Bastian brings millions in grant funding to the university. The regulatory agencies are underfunded at best, apathetic at worst. Even the newspapers aren't interested.
Lots of universities conduct animal research, Jones. It's an evil, I'll give you that. But it doesn't warrant my involvement.
Think back to your history lessons, Ms. Carr.
This time it was the patrician tones of a Boston male speaking to her.
Back to the beheadings in ancient Rome, or during the French Revolution.
Your grace period is long past, Jones. The fixer wanted her prospect to know her irritation. You want to waste my time on a Western Civ review, or do you want to tell me what you really want?
When I'm finished, Ms. Carr, you'll have no question about the need to rid the world of Dr. Bastian's work. Indulge me, please.
Sincerity ran through the synthesized plea. The fixer gave a reluctant nod.
Recall the scene recreated in countless epics. The defeated led to the chopping block. The bloodthirsty mob gathered to witness their payback, the victor grabbing the severed head and holding it aloft for the cheering crowds.
What's this got to do with Bastian? The fixer stood with her hands on her hips. You've got 1 minute before I walk out of here.
Common law has those severed heads held high so the crowd could savor their revenge.
The Boston-accented man had the perfect voice for this history lesson.
However, the act served another purpose. You see, the victim's senses continued to work for as long as a person can hold their breath. What's that, Ms. Carr? A minute, perhaps 90 seconds. The victor could turn the poor soul's gaze for a horrifying view of their own headless body. One last exquisite torture before the great abyss.
The fixer swallowed hard. The list of ways humans could be cruel to one another was as endless as the stars in the heavens. What's this have to do with Bastian? I won't ask again.
You've seen the monkeys in Bastian's lab. You've heard the dogs. I'm sorry they're not enough to convince you. Let me tell you about Or2.
The video came to life again. The fixer took a shuffled step back as the screen filled with a colossal, hairy face.
Ortu's a mountain gorilla, a rare specimen in the wild, let alone in captivity. These creatures are between 98 and 99% genetically identical to humans.
Jones fell silent as the fixer watched Ortu pace back and forth in a room-sized cage.
Ortu was somewhere around 20 years old when this video was taken, fully in his prime. Did you know, Ms. Carr, that gorillas live 50 years, some more? They have individual fingerprints. They even have face-to-face sex. I'm sure you're aware that it's possible for them to learn sign language and communicate thoughts and feelings with us.
The fixer watched Ortu grab the iron bars of his cage in his massive hands, yanking on them as he roared and bared his teeth.
Ortu must have been the dominant troop leader prior to his capture. Jones continued the lesson. He never went submissive. In the end, I think that's what cost him. Bastian was never able to make Ortu grovel.
Bastian has a gorilla? The fixer asked. Does he conduct research at a zoo? A pained sigh came through the speakers.
No one knows how Bastian got him. He kept him in a secret facility. The few assistants who held Bastian in godlike esteem were the only ones who knew Ortu existed.
How did you get this tape?
I can't answer that, Ms. Carr. Please allow me one last story. Like I said, Bastian was incensed by the gorilla's insistence on dominance. He could get near Ortu only when the animal was fully sedated. He implanted electrodes, but all he got from Ortu was rage. No fear, no submission. Ortu never gave him the subtle emotional distinctions Bastian was looking for in his research. I think even Bastian began to fear him. At least, that's my hope.
The fixer wasn't watching the clock anymore.
After nearly a year, Bastian realized Ortu was a liability. The gorilla was of no research benefit. Bastian couldn't give him to a zoo. He'd have to explain how he came into possession of a gorilla. He couldn't return him to the wild. It must have been difficult enough to smuggle Ortu in. He couldn't risk detection by returning him to the jungle.
A resigned breath came through the speakers.
One night, a casual conversation gave Bastian his out. And his revenge.
What happened?
Bastian was holding court with his inner circle of research assistants, wine and cheese, while Bastian pontificated and soaked up the unquestioning worship he demanded of his graduate students.
The speakers shifted to a woman's tender voice. On that particular night, the topic centered on proving that a severed head could, indeed, continue to function once it was separated from its body. Neuroscientists are often intrigued by ghoulish topics. Bastian suggested an experiment. Or two. The fixer whispered her question. I imagine some of the lab assistants were emboldened by the wine. Maybe others were terrified of Bastian's power to ruin a career with one phone call. The female voice turned sad. For whatever reason, the entire meeting headed out to Ortu's hidden prison. The overhead television came back on. The fixer saw again the Spartan room. She heard various voices, male and female, chattering behind whoever carried the video camera. She watched Ortu pacing his cage, saw him look up when the research entourage approached the mighty behemoth. Ortu shifted into a violent rage several seconds later. The fixer assumed Bastian had entered the room. He recorded this? Why?
Ego, Ms. Carr. Bastian believed every move he made was of profound importance. He was convinced future generations of scientists would benefit from his archiving every step of his work, no matter how mundane or cruel.
The fixer watched a dart fly into the raging beast's chest and tried hard to swallow the bile rising in the back of her throat. Less than a minute later, Ortu was slumped in his cell, his breathing rapid and shallow. The screen went black for a second, then resumed to show Ortu chained spread-eagle in his cage. Wires had been connected to the dozens of permanently implanted electrodes in his giant skull. Lingering effects of the tranquilizing agent were evident as Ortu struggled to lift his head off his gargantuan chest. No people were seen, but the television speaker blared the audio of a scolding man.
"Damn it! Give me the blasted tool!"
Bastian's angry face came into view. The camera captured him as he approached Ortu's cell and opened the door. The gorilla tried to react to his captor, but a roll of his titanic head and a small grimace was all he could muster. Bastian looked off to the right before turning back to the camera with a nod.
1:15 a.m. Subject is approached.
He toggled the switch on a long-bladed reciprocating saw and entered the cell. Stepping past the chains that held Ortu, Bastian circled behind the once proud Alpha and climbed onto a stool. He grabbed a handful of the gorilla's hair and jerked back, exposing the mighty primate's thick throat. The throbbing veins on his own telegraphed Bastian's rage.
1:16 a.m., Bastian called out to the camera. Subject is sacrificed.
Bastian placed the blade against Ortu's windpipe and sawed. A geyser of red erupted. The fixer added her own gasp to those heard on the television. Bastian maintained his grip on Ortu's hair as he manipulated the whirring saw through muscle and bone. 10 long seconds passed as the scientist struggled to free Ortu's massive head without disturbing any electrode leads. Bastian was covered in blood, muscle bits and bone fragments as he cut through the last slippery sinew connecting Ortu's head to his body. He threw the saw to the concrete floor. He yelled to no one in particular.
"Are we recording?"
Bastian scurried around Ortu's body, still suspended in chains. The camera captured him taking 2 quick steps outside the cell before he turned the bloody head toward the carcass in the cage.
"How's that, you bastard ape?"
he screamed as he held the severed head high in 2 hands.
"You see that? You know who I am now, monkey!"
The gruesome image on the screen disappeared. The fixer didn't move.
Bastian got what he was looking for.
The speaker this time was a female child.
The EEG signals proved beyond any doubt that Ortu's brain was registering the sight of his own headless body. For the first time, Bastian got an emotion other than rage from Ortu.
The child's voice caught.
The readings on the EEG were identical to human terror.
The fixer stood silent, her body weary from the weight of the depravity she'd just witnessed. "I'm going to need that tape," she said. Seconds later, a CD case was tossed from the darkness above. The fixer walked a step, bent, and retrieved it. $500,000 goes to People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals before I fix this. She tucked the CD into a jacket pocket. "That's a lot of money, Ms. Carr," the Boston-accented man again. "And I'll need to see you. Now." The fixer stood in the center of the spotlight and waited. "I'm here, Ms. Carr." A male voice from behind her. No electronics, no distortion. The fixer whirled. She squinted into the dark and shifted her feet into a combat stance. "Step closer, Jones." A tall, thin man stepped into the circle of light. The fixer estimated his age somewhere south of 30. Sandy hair, jeans, Radiohead t-shirt, indistinguishable from the thousands of grad students who filled the U-District coffee shops. He shrugged skinny shoulders and stuck out a pale arm.
"Do we shake on this, or what?"
His real voice was a nasal whistle. "Give me your driver's license." The fixer held out her hand.
"What? No, I mean, you can't know—"
"I can't know who you are, Mr. Jones," she interrupted. "Give it to me or I walk." The young man hesitated. Then he reached into his back pocket for his wallet. Struggling with shaking hands, he managed to pull out his license and hand it to the terrifying goth.
"Are you going to turn me in?" he asked. "Oh, God, please tell me you're not a cop."
"Mr. Jones." She scanned the license. "I should say, Mr. Buckner." She looked at the license again before tucking it into her jacket pocket. "Your name is Walter?" "Wally. It is my purest intention that we never see each other again. This license puts me next to you if you break any of our rules. Am I clear?" His jaw quivered as he nodded his head. "I'm leaving now, Walter." The fixer glanced up to the rafters. "I imagine you have some cleaning up to do." Chapter 11.
"Why am I getting these numbers now, Carl?"
Deidre Thornton threw the data printout onto her desk. She wasn't concerned about containing her anger.
"We're a Level 1A research institution. 4 straight years of increased funding. I'm the university president, for God's sake. And I'm finding this out now, after the midterm funding season?"
Carl Snelling took a step back.
"Answer me, Carl."
She toyed with the long rope of pearls draped from her neck.
"When did you first learn this?"
Carl shuffled through the duplicate printout he held.
"Is it really that bad, Deidre? This economy leads to cuts everywhere. I heard rumors NIH wasn't funding anything below the upper 3%.
He leaned toward her and whispered,
"I've got someone at Johns Hopkins who tells me even their grant funding has been slashed."
Deidre had no interest in other universities' woes. Her own house was on fire.
31% below last cycle.
She shoved a wayward strand of ash-blonde hair behind her ear.
Nearly $50 million. You tell me, Carl. Is it really that bad?
Deidre paced her office and punctuated her steps with icy stares.
How many research assistants will we lose? How many graduate students or support staff? My God, a loss like this could cost us faculty members.
She marched straight toward him and ignored his subtle flinch.
These people have families, Carl.
She stood 2 inches from his nose.
Anyone wondering if this kind of loss is really that bad doesn't deserve to be standing in an executive office."
Carl's voice faltered. "I'm sorry, Deidre. I didn't realize the funding shortfall would be this great." His lower lip quivered. "What would you like me to do now?" Deidre's withering gaze suggested he was a gumball ring trying to pass as a diamond.
"That question is about 3 months late, Carl."
She pivoted on a black suede pump and punched a button on her phone.
"Angela, can you get me Bradley Wells, please? Use his private number."
Chapter 12.
"Is there some reason we're not at Smitty's?"
Jim Davila slid into the leather banquette and admired the sailboats moored outside Elliot's on the bay's windows.
"I can hear my credit card being declined already."
"Drinks are on me." Mort took his place across from his friend. "Today is too special for a cop bar." Jim's face wrinkled before he shook his head in recognition.
"Sorry, buddy. November 11th. Remember how she used to call it railroad tracks?"
Mort smiled. 11/11. I wasn't in any shape to mark the day last year.
"I'm honored to be included," Jim said. "Things getting better?"
Mort shrugged. "Most days I can't believe she's gone. I expect to pick up the phone and hear her chewing me out for working late. Maybe see her sitting in the dining room paying bills when I get home." He signaled for the waitress. "But I haven't smashed anything in 6 months."
"I'm calling that progress."
Jim smiled at the blonde taking his order.
"Whiskey and a beer, please. Something local, in a bottle."
Mort ordered scotch on the rocks.
"How's Robbie adjusting?"
Jim helped himself to the salted cashews on the table.
"Must be tough, him being so far away."
"He's got Claire and the girls."
"He working on anything interesting?"
Mort nodded. "Branching away from insider trading and fraud. Remember Gordon Holloway? Robbie's working a hunch the asshole was murdered. Hired hit." Mort let his pride show. "He might be onto something."
"And another Grant man falls victim to the seductive lure of homicide," Jim said. "What's he got?"
Their drinks were delivered before Mort could answer. They each lifted their glass. "To Edie," Mort said. "Happy birthday, baby girl."
"To the classiest woman I've ever met. Why she married you, none of us will ever know."
Jim took a sip of whiskey.
"So, Robbie and his hired hit."
Mort settled back and brought his friend up to speed on his son's theories. Jim reaffirmed Mort's concern that a hired professional might leave him with no story at all.
"Might as well try to nail the wind," Jim said. "But if he's anything like his old man, that's not going to stop him."
The perky blonde came back carrying a bottle of Lafroig and 2 crystal tumblers. She smiled as she set the 15-year-old scotch in front of them.
"From the gentleman."
The waitress nodded to a thin man flanked by 2 barely dressed women at the end of the bar.
"He asks that I tell you he appreciates the quality of your work."
"Are you shitting me?"
Jim moved his hand to the small of his back and rested it on his holster. "Easy there, partner." Mort smiled at the waitress. "No offense intended, miss, but we'd prefer you returned this to that cockroach." Mort shifted his focus to the bar. The man who sent the bottle kissed each woman full on the mouth before heading toward Mort and Jim's table. "Beat it, Junior," Mort said to the jerk in leather jacket and jeans. The man who liked to call himself Satan brushed aside the waitress clearing the scotch. "Leave it," he said as he tucked a $50 bill in her collar.
These poor schmucks are going to learn the joys of a $200 bottle of liquid gold." The waitress shot Mort a frightened look and hurried away. Satan turned toward Jim. "Where's your little doggy? I thought he was part of your act. Officer Numbnuts and his trusty pooch doing tricks for treats." Angelo Satanel Jr. laughed and glanced around the bar. He looked disappointed that no one was paying attention. He focused on Mort. "And Detective Quickdraw, too. This place has lost its standards." Mort fixed a cold gaze on Satanel and lifted his own glass for a taste. "You drink that swill while a bottle of heaven sits in front of you?" Satanel turned back to look at his women. "Your pay grade has warped your taste buds, my friend." "We don't need your booze, Junior," Jimmy said. "And we don't need your shit either. Now, be a good little boy and go spend Daddy's money on your whores." Satanel grinned at Mort. "You still pissed at me about that cello player?" He leaned forward, both hands on their table. "Little girls play with fire, their asses get burned." Satanel dropped his voice to a taunting whisper. "Miss Allie knew that, didn't she, Papa?" "Step back, Junior!" Jim slid closer to Mort. "Unless you want to see how fast I can have you in cuffs." Satanel glanced again to his women. He seemed pleased they were watching, and tossed a wink before turning back to Mort. "Your cunt of a daughter knew what to do with top-shelf liquor." Mort's sudden lunge sent Satanel skidding in reflex. Jim grabbed Mort with both hands and shoved him back into the booth. "Go ahead, old man!" Satanel was yelling now. "Touch me! Put a hand on Satan and wait for the fire." Jim struggled to keep his friend seated. "Save it, Mort! Time will come to deal with this piece of shit. Save it!" Angelo Satanel Jr. tipped a two-finger salute and swaggered back to the two women feigning concern for their man. Mort waited until his breath was close to normal before shrugging off Jim's hold. He watched Satanel and the women leave the bar. "He thinks he's bulletproof." Jim shook his head. "Daddy being daddy, and things being things, he just may be correct." Mort reached for his glass and drained his scotch in one swallow. "Correct doesn't make it right."
Chapter 13. Lydia Corriger got to work early the day before Thanksgiving and defied the rainy gloom by clicking on 2 table lamps before settling behind her desk with her coffee and newspaper. The front page led with the City Council's debate regarding earthquake standards for homes. A photo of local food pantry volunteers filling charity bags reminded readers there was still time to donate. Lydia made a mental note to take the game hen she purchased for her own Thursday dinner out of the freezer. The national section had an article on the latest finger-pointing in Congress. Lydia shook her head at a silly photograph of the president pardoning a turkey and moved on to an article about a significant donation to the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. An anonymous donor had given $500,000 to the organization. No strings attached, according to the beaming chief executive. She finished the paper and checked her schedule. She was booked every hour, straight through to Savannah Samuels at 6. She unlocked her office at 7:55, and her first patient walked through the door 3 minutes later. Patsy Sullivan was 54 years old, overweight, greasy hair, baggy sweatpants, and a dirty red-down vest. Patsy's employer had contacted Lydia. Despite her talent with children, parents were complaining, and Patsy was in danger of losing her job as a preschool teacher. Patsy didn't bathe. She didn't shower. She didn't brush her teeth. She didn't shampoo, and she didn't wash her clothes. Patsy stank. Lydia ushered her into the office. Patsy chose the sofa, and Lydia was glad it was leather. She watched Patsy pull folders out of a large canvas bag and set them on the coffee table. "I made copies for you," Patsy said. "Here's my chart from Dr. Roth. He's my prescribing doctor. I've been seeing him for 9 years. There's an updated list of my medications on the inside flap." She pulled a 3-ring binder out of her bag. "This is a copy of my chart from Dr. Restkis. He was my talking doctor. I only saw him for 3 years. Patsy looked up at Lydia with rheumy brown eyes. "I wore him out. He didn't know what to do with me." Lydia took her seat across from the malodorous woman. She counted 7 files and binders on the table, and the bag wasn't yet empty. "I'll begin with an overview of my mother." Patsy pulled out an expandable legal folder. "All the doctors agree she's the root of my problem." She snapped the elastic band open. "Now, my earliest memory is—" "Stop." Lydia held her hand up. "Just stop." Patsy froze mid-movement. "Put the folders down." Lydia kept her voice quiet and firm. "I want to tell you about my mother," Patsy said. "And I want to hear it. But not today. Today we're going to talk about why you're here." Patsy blinked several times. "But you'll need to understand about my mother." Lydia leaned back. "How did you get here today? Not why, but how?" Patsy balked. "I drove. I don't see the importance of—" "A car?" Lydia interrupted. "You drove yourself here in a car." "Of course." Patty set the folder aside. "Where are you going with this?" "I wonder, do you understand the physics behind an internal combustion engine?" Lydia feigned amazement. "I mean, think about it. There's a fire going on inside your car's engine. Doesn't that freak you out? A fire inside your engine." Patsy's eyebrows shot up. Lydia leaned forward. "I'll bet you don't understand internal combustion. I know I don't. And yet, you were able to manage your car sufficiently to get here. Is that right?" I don't know what you want me to say." Lydia pointed to the stack of files and binders overwhelming the coffee table. "Look at this stuff. You've been trying to understand yourself for years." Patsy nodded. "I've been in therapy since I was 22. "Then let's stop doing what hasn't been working." Lydia tossed the folders off the coffee table, leaned back, and replaced them with her feet. "Now tell me, are you afraid of water?" "But my mother used to—" Lydia interrupted again. "We're not talking about your mother today. Answer my question. Are you afraid of water?" No, it's my lack of motivation. My mother always said—" "Soap?" Lydia tilted her head to one side. "Shampoo, deodorant, afraid of those?" Patsy shook her head. "Of course not. I have lots of potions and lotions." "Great." Lydia swung her feet off the table and grabbed her notebook. "Then let's set up a schedule for the rest of your morning." She smiled at her confused patient. "Patsy, you're going to take a shower today, and you're going to call me when you're done." "But my mother—" Patsy's voice had lost its volume. Lydia interrupted with a gentle insistence. "Your mother's not here, and you're about to lose your job." She leaned closer. "I will never lie to you, nor will I sugarcoat things. Patsy, you stink, and we're going to fix that today." "Just like that?" Her smile was tentative. Lydia held her gaze. Just like that. Now, I know you're on suspension, so Lydia began writing. If you left here at 9 and drove straight home,
with my internal combustion engine,
Patty interjected. That's right. Lydia gave her a warm smile. What time would you get home?
About 9:40, I assume.
Patsy's voice hinted at conspiracy. Great. Lydia allowed her enthusiasm to build. You go straight to your bathroom. Do not pass go, do not collect $200. Strip off your clothes and you're in the shower by 10 to 10. She glanced up at her patient. Your bathroom's clean enough for this. Patsy nodded.
It's just me who's dirty.
Bingo! We're going to fix this. Lydia returned her attention to the notebook. First, you'll shampoo, and when the bottle says lather, rinse, repeat, I want you to do that twice, okay? Patsy's smile broadened.
You're not the typical shrink, are you?
Lydia winked. Patsy, you're not going to talk your way out of this pickle. You're not going to think your way out or understand your way out. You're going to do your way out of this. Right? Patsy stared at Lydia for several heartbeats. Lydia held her gaze. Finally, she let out a hearty laugh.
No one's ever done this, she said. Do you know how many doctors I've been to? Not one of them has told me I stink and need to go home and take a bath.
Lydia leaned back and smiled. I don't like to dally. If there's a way to fix something, I don't like to waste time. Are you with me? Patsy chuckled, and a boa of fat jiggled beneath her dingy sweatshirt.
I've got some really fancy face cleanser I've been dying to try.
Brilliant. Next comes the body wash. Lydia's day marched forward in 1-hour segments. John McKenna wanted help finding meaning in the recent cancer death of his 19-year-old son. Alexander Quinton couldn't shake his conviction he would die in an airplane crash before his 50th birthday. Marilyn Martinella discovered when her youngest daughter left for college that she hated her husband. Lydia's one respite from the parade of human sadness came when the mailman delivered an orange envelope tucked in with a stack of bills and payments. There was no return address. She weighed it in her hand and held it to the light before sliding a letter opener across its seam. Inside, a stylized farmhouse viewed from across a snowy field graced the front of a greeting card. Wishing you the warmest of wishes this Thanksgiving. Below the printed greeting, handwritten in green ink. Good news, I've perfected the beans. The offer's still open for a free sample. Oliver. Lydia flipped the card over and read it again. She slid it back into its envelope and tossed it in the wastebasket next to her desk. The buzzer sounded in her waiting room, letting her know her next patient had arrived. She grabbed her notebook and rose to open the door. On impulse, she stooped, retrieved the discarded Thanksgiving greeting, and slid it into the top drawer of her desk. Her 4 o'clock was Jackie Vincent, a single mother of a 17-year-old gangster wannabe. This was Jackie's second visit. She came saying she needed to develop skills for coping with what she described as her headstrong and spirited child.
He called me a motherfucking bitch last night,
Jackie sobbed into her lace handkerchief.
Why would he do that, Dr. Corriger? I give him everything.
What did you do when he called you that? Lydia asked. Jackie's shoulders heaved with her sobs.
I went to my bedroom. Then, when I thought his mood was better, I made some popcorn, and we watched a scary movie together. It was nice.
How old was he the first time he called you a name?
This one?
Jackie dabbed her eyes. Any name. How old was he the first time he disrespected you? Lydia asked. Jackie thought back.
I can remember him calling me Poopy Head when he was about 2.
What did you do then? Jackie shrugged.
He was 2.
She smiled.
I thought it was cute.
There's your answer, Jackie. Lydia hoped her patient would hear her. He called you a motherfucking bitch because you allow it. We have to teach people how to treat us. On they came, a succession of sorrow, hoping for comfort or direction. As the day wore on, Lydia wondered if she'd have the energy left to deal with her last patient of the day. Savannah Samuels was 6 minutes late. She pulled a bottle of wine out of an oversized leather tote, tossed her raincoat across a chair, and settled onto the sofa. For your Thanksgiving, Dr. Corriger. Savannah placed the Syrah on the coffee table. I don't know what you're serving, but a $100 bottle of wine goes with anything. Lydia took a seat across from the tired-looking beauty. Why do you do that? Savannah frowned.
What are you talking about?
You lead with money. You carry large amounts of cash. You tried to tip me on your first visit and bribe me on your second. Now you bring a bottle of wine.
It's Thanksgiving.
Savannah pushed a blue-black curl behind her ear.
A holiday gesture.
Lydia sensed her patient's unease. But you made sure I knew the price. Why?
Look, no offense intended.
Savannah retreated back into the cushions.
Give the wine to the cleaning lady for all I care.
Savannah stared at a chipped fingernail. Do you want me to know you're rich, Savannah? Is that it? Savannah crossed her legs and stared into nothingness. Do you think I'll like you more if I know you're wealthy? Perhaps bring my A-game to our sessions? Lydia pressed despite her patient's obvious discomfort. Savannah rubbed the back of her neck and closed her eyes. 2 minutes passed before she opened them.
Maybe money's not a big deal for you anymore, Dr. Corriger. But remember, it wasn't that way on my side of the tracks.
I know nothing about your side of the tracks, Savannah. What was it like for you growing up? Regret danced across Savannah's face and settled into disappointment.
You want to know about my mother? Maybe my trials and tribulations with potty training?
You hired me, remember? Lydia forced her voice to a calmness she didn't feel. You came here crying, told me you were broken. You dropped by without an appointment. You asked for my help, and I agree to work with you. It's been like this for months. She leaned forward. And now you insult me. Do you think we're getting closer to fixing you, or further away? Savannah's blue eyes softened, revealing the terror that lurked beneath her sophisticated mask. She bowed her head, and a teardrop fell onto her suede skirt.
I'm sorry. I was rude.
You can be rude, Savannah. I can handle that. But defensiveness just wastes time. Lydia watched her patient reach for a tissue, blot her eyes, and twist the tissue into a strangled coil. Tell me what it was like growing up. Let's start with Dad.
That's easy.
Savannah looked up and smirked.
Never met him. My mother told me he was a soldier, killed in Vietnam.
She bit her lower lip, then looked away.
She didn't have a clue who he was.
That must be difficult for you. Lydia kept her eyes on her patient's face.
Not at all.
Savannah shoved her bangs aside.
You can't miss what you never knew.
Lydia let her hold that fallacy for the moment. And Mom, what about her?
I don't have enough money to pay for the hours it would take to tell you about her, Dr. Corriger. And I have a lot of money.
Savannah grimaced.
Sorry.
Lydia smiled. We'll call that an insight moment. She leaned back. Give me some broad strokes. Help me see your mother. Is she as beautiful as you?" Savannah's face contorted again.
It's hard to think of myself as beautiful. That's not false modesty. I'm well aware of the effect I have on men. Women, too.
She turned her attention again to empty space.
I use it to my advantage whenever I can. But I know who I am underneath. And as they say, ugliness goes to the bone.
I asked about your mother, Savannah, not you. Savannah nodded.
So you did. No, my mother wasn't beautiful. Not outside, not inside. She loved the men, though. Did whatever she could to make sure there were always a few in her life. My bullpen, she called them.
What did she do for a living?
I don't know.
Savannah's smile lacked any trace of humor.
My mother dumped me in foster care when I was about 2. I'm told she visited me once when I was 6.
Savannah focused a stare on Lydia.
You see, something terrible happened to me at one of the foster homes.
Lydia's throat tightened. You want to talk about it? Savannah kept her eyes riveted on Lydia.
Another foster kid stopped it. A teenaged girl. Skinny as a rail, but stronger than anyone I've ever met before or since. I think the foster father was doing the same thing to her.
Lydia felt her tongue go dry. She reached for a sip of water. I'm sorry that happened to you, Savannah.
My protector saved me.
Savannah's smile was soft and genuine.
I never forgot her.
Her voice turned to a whispered vow.
And I never will.
Lydia nodded. And that was when you were reunited with your mother. Savannah stiffened her back.
Briefly. She came for a meeting with the social services people. Demanded they find me a better place. I think she patted my head as she left. I didn't see her again until I was 14. She took us to Texas and we were together for 2 whole weeks before she drove me to a hotel in downtown Galveston. Told me to wait in the lobby. Said she had to go to work and a nice man was going to pick me up. I was to do whatever he said.
What did you make of that? Lydia hoped she'd hear an ending other than the one she imagined.
I thought it was kind of strange, given that she'd never gone to work before, and we didn't live in Galveston.
Savannah rubbed a hand across her porcelain forehead.
A man came and picked me up, though, and I did whatever he said.
More tears dropped to her lap.
When he finished, he gave me $5 and told me I should be in school.
Was that your first sexual experience, Savannah? Lydia kept her voice steady and soft. Beyond the rape when you were 6. Savannah turned to Lydia. 2 blue lasers beamed from a flawless face.
I'd been in the foster system for 12 years, Dr. Corriger. 9 different homes. No, it wasn't my first sexual experience. Just the first time I got paid.
And your mother? Lydia knew better than to react to Savannah's shame.
She kept the business going. I was her merchandise, and she was a good little sales clerk.
The emotion so naked on Savannah's face turned from shame to anger.
About a month into it, a customer asked me how old I was. I told him. He showed me a badge, and I was back in foster.
And your mother? Lydia hoped the repetition would help soothe Savannah.
Never heard from her again.
Savannah bounced her right leg. You deserved better. Lydia handed her a fresh box of tissues.
Don't pity me, Dr. Corriger. That's not why I'm here.
Savannah's voice grew stronger.
My mother's shenanigans earned me special attention from the authorities. The next 4 years in the state's care were okay. Nobody touched me. I was safe from then on.
Lydia let the weight of the revelation hang for several moments. From then on is a long time. You would have been graduated from the system when you were 18. That's nearly 10 years ago. What's life been like since? Savannah struck a pose and fluffed her hair.
Don't I look like I've made a success of myself? Aren't you proud of what I've become?
She slipped out of teasing and resumed her anger.
Like I said, I'm well aware of the effect I have on men.
Are you telling me you're a prostitute, Savannah? Is that what you think is broken in you? Savannah laughed for the first time that session.
Aren't we all prostitutes, Dr. Corriger? Don't we all march to the tune someone else is calling just so we can get paid? I mean, look at you. You're willing to accept my terms, my rudeness, in order to collect your fee. In cash. She laughed again. The only difference is you don't accept tips.
Are we back to insults? Lydia's voice was calm and steady. If so, I'll ask you again. Do you think that gets you closer to your goal, or farther away? Savannah looked at her watch, stood, and collected her coat and bag.
Sex isn't the reason I get paid. It's just a tool of my trade.
She reached into her pocket, pulled out an envelope, and laid it on the table next to the tissue box.
Exact amount.
She turned to go. We still have time left, Savannah, Lydia said.
I'm done for today.
Savannah tossed over her shoulder.
Have a nice Thanksgiving.
The quiet isolation of Lydia's cliffside home wasn't working. A continuous loop of her session with Savannah played in her brain. Cursing her sleeplessness, she tossed off the covers and climbed out of bed. She went into her kitchen, clicked on the lights, and lifted a favorite bonsai tree from the windowsill over the sink. Lydia moved the tree to the table, got her trimmers and scissors out of the drawer, and set about the quiet work of snipping and cutting, mindfully training the tree to perfection. For 20 minutes she tried to focus on the branches and leaves, purposefully avoiding thoughts of the beautiful patient who was in such pain. That wasn't working either. She went into her bathroom, splashed water on her neck, and buried her face in a thick cotton towel. Savannah's face danced in her memory. Lydia needed sleep. She blew out a long, tight breath and opened a drawer, fumbled past cosmetics and creams, and grabbed a pink plastic box in the back. She placed the container on the commode and sat on the side of the tub. She stared at it, knowing it held the relief she needed. She took a deep breath, reached for the box, and brought it to her lap. She pulled her white cotton nightgown up, exposing her right thigh. She snapped the box open and stared at 6 double-edged razors. Lydia inspected one after the other, holding each between her thumb and index finger. She surveyed their edges, watched the light glint off the blades, relished the foreplay. She made her selection, set the box aside, and held the razor to her thigh. One quick slice, shallow. A second slice, deeper, no blood. A third, deeper still. Lydia watched the crimson ooze over her pale skin and shuddered in relief. She drew a finger across the wound, smearing her blood. Then a deep cleansing breath and a quick cleanup. Peace could finally come. Chapter 14. Fred Bastian slammed his front door and threw his briefcase onto the dining table as he made his way into the kitchen of his University Heights home.
Bastards!
He shouted to the empty house.
Fuck them all!
He entered the butler's pantry, pulled a bottle of scotch from the leaded glass cabinet, and filled a Waterford tumbler halfway with the amber liquid. Bastian looked at the clock. 4:20.
Close enough, he whispered before taking a long drink.
The day had been a disaster, starting with the invitation to Deidre Thornton's office. An invitation he'd ignored. Who the hell was she to summon him? But in light of the morning's faculty meeting, it might have been a misstep. Bastian made a mental note to call Carl Snelling for a read on Deidre. He'd need her in his corner. He'd sensed the mood of his minions changing over the past few months, but he'd been too preoccupied with his research to address it. He shook his head and relived their betrayal. The boring rituals, roll call, minutes, announcements. Then the heart of the departmental meeting, consideration of new faculty. 6 candidates for 2 available positions. Bastian let the 36 faculty members prattle on for 20 minutes and pretended their input mattered. When he'd had enough, he nodded to Fritz Walther. The portly faculty moderator pulled himself to his feet, called the discussion closed, and announced the final agenda item, the annual vote giving Bastian the faculty's proxy in all personnel matters. It was routine, a rubber stamp ceding him full power to hire or fire any member of the department. The first warning came when Levine asked for a change from the customary voice vote.
"Fucking know-it-all Jew!"
Bastian called out to his empty kitchen.
"I should have squashed his tenure when I had the chance."
He took another greedy pull from his scotch and remembered the pathetic look on Walther's face as he fumbled for enough paper for the secret ballot. Bastian held a cool smile as the votes were counted. No need to worry, he told himself. Just a few disgruntled idiots taking a naive swipe at power. He remembered shooting a look to Jerry Childress, his vice chair, the one he counted on to keep the natives contained and cowed. Childress focused on his laptop and ignored him.
"Fucking Judas!"
Bastian drained his glass and threw it against the sub-zero stainless steel refrigerator. Shards of crystal fell to the tiled floor. The count had been 31-5 against him. Bastian grasped the ramifications immediately. Every department chair in the university held their faculty's proxy. This would be seen as a vote of no confidence. He'd be the laughingstock of campus before nightfall. By tomorrow, the research community around the world would know. He'd have to think fast and call in some large chits if he was going to weather this storm. Bastian poured himself another scotch and ignored the chimes. He felt no need to endure the false sympathy detail-hungry colleagues might offer on the other side of his front door. He took his glass and bottle to the sun porch at the rear of the house and cursed himself for relying on Childress to keep the underlings in line. Bastian flopped onto a chaise and gazed into his backyard. The outdoor lights had been synchronized to the shortened days. A blanket of snow, rare for Washington, left dollops of white on the long curving boughs of the fir trees. He remembered that Christmas was next week. The dean of the medical school had invited him to his family's ski lodge on Crystal Mountain. "Have to get new plans now," he said to no one as he took a straight swig from the bottle. He saw her approach from the west side of the house, tall and slender, long brown hair under a bright red beret, struggling with an enormous poinsettia plant as she stepped gingerly over the snowy walk. Bastian cradled the scotch and watched her climb the icy stairs to the deck. The porch light caught her face.
An ethereal snow fairy,
he sang to the empty room. He saluted her beauty, took another drink, and watched her through the floor-to-ceiling windows. He felt a voyeur's tingling excitement as he followed her struggle to balance the large pot. She brushed snow off an outdoor table and carefully set the flowers down. She reached inside her navy peacoat, pulled out a white envelope, and nestled it in among the giant blooms. For a moment he contemplated inviting this delivery person in for a cup of holiday cheer. But he sat still, watched her turn to go, watched her slip on his stairs, and land with a surprised yelp.
"Oh, shit!"
Bastian pulled himself off the chaise, set his bottle down, and took 3 heavy steps toward the deck. He leaned against the door and breathed deeply, trying to clear his head of scotch and irritation.
"What the hell happened?"
he yelled as he yanked the door open.
"Who the fuck are you, and what are you doing in my backyard?"
The young woman groaned and struggled to sit up. Her beret fell, a slash of red against the accumulating white. She turned to retrieve it. The porch light caught her face, and Bastian smiled as the snow-encrusted lovely tried to regain her dignity and struggled to stand on wobbly legs.
"You could put a little salt on those steps, mister."
She sounded more frightened than hurt.
"You're lucky I didn't break my neck. I could sue, you know."
Her false bravado amused him.
"And I could have you arrested for trespass. Who are you?"
The beautiful intruder fixed her red hat back on her head and pointed a gloved hand toward the poinsettia.
"Colleen O'Leary. I deliver for Rainier Floral. I tried your front door, but there was no answer. I didn't want to leave your plant where somebody could take it, so I brought it around back. Merry fucking Christmas."
"Stay where you are."
Bastian crossed over the snowy deck and pulled the card from the plant. He chuckled when he saw it was from Deidre Thornton. She'd probably ordered them some time ago. He doubted the university president would be so generous given the day's events. He tossed the card down and stumbled back toward the house.
"Hey, mister,"
the delivery girl shuffled over to the table.
"Aren't you going to take this plant inside? It's like $100 flower. Somebody must love you a lot."
"Keep it,"
he called over his shoulder, then stalked into the room and threw himself back onto the chaise. Colleen picked up the plant and the card and flat-stepped cautiously across the slippery deck to the still-open back door.
"Mind if I just set this inside? It'll die out here."
Bastian surveyed the woman in his doorway. Her hair, damp from the melting snow, clung to her face and framed translucent skin and bright green eyes. Plaid kilt and navy blue leggings under her peacoat, dark green rubber boots. Bastian blinked hard to steady his liquored focus.
"Put it over there."
He motioned toward the glass table at the far end of the sunroom.
"And close the door behind you. It's freezing out there."
Colleen balanced the heavy pot on one hip when she turned to close the door. She kept an eye on him as she crossed toward the table.
"You been drinking, mister?"
Bastian held the scotch bottle high in his right hand.
"Care to join me? If you're not a scotch person, there's plenty of whatever."
Colleen crinkled her nose and looked around the room.
"You sure? Won't your wife wonder who I am?"
Bastian took a long pull from the bottle.
"There's no wife. What did you say your name was?"
"Colleen O'Leary. From Rainier's?"
She shoved her hands in her pockets and rocked back and forth in her green boots.
"Ah, an Irish lass, come to bring me Christmas cheer."
Bastian's attempt at a brogue fell short.
"Come drink with me, lassie. 'Tis a dark day I'm having."
She shrugged her shoulders and unbuttoned her coat.
What the hell? You're my last delivery and my back is killing me after that tumble. You got Irish? Bastian tried to get up but collapsed back onto the chaise. Sit still, Colleen said. You have your own little party working. Point me in the direction and I'll help myself. Bastian waved her to the butler's pantry.
There's whiskey in there, child. Fine Irish whiskey. Just the thing for a cold winter's night of betrayal.
She tossed her jacket on a chair, left the room, and returned 2 minutes later with a tumbler of liquor. Colleen lifted her gloved hands toward her host and wished him happy holidays. She took a small sip.
So what's this about betrayal?
Bastian tried to focus. He moved his legs to one side and patted the open area at the foot of the chaise.
Come sit with me, and I'll tell you a story worthy of Irish tears, a tale of brilliance unappreciated, of deception colder than the snow that falls outside those doors.
She took the seat he suggested. You have a poet's soul. What's got you bummed this close to Christmas? He leaned back and gazed at her. The soft light of the one table lamp gave her a candle-lit glow. Bastian remembered a time when all his women were this innocent and fresh. He smiled at the delightful turn the day had taken.
You're quite beautiful.
He brushed a long strand of hair away from her face. She didn't flinch. He brought his hand lightly across her cheek and traced her full lips with his thumb.
Do you know who I am?
Colleen bowed her head, grinned, and looked up at him with long-lashed green eyes.
Of course I know who you are, Dr. Bastian. I've wanted to meet you for the longest time, ever since I read your paper in Science about opiate effects on maternal bonding.
Bastian tilted his head as he caressed her cheek. Her naivete proved more intoxicating than his scotch.
You're not a delivery person, are you?
This was his favorite perk. The academic groupies so willing to service the bodies of the illustrious minds they adored, deluding themselves into thinking they were special because they sucked the cock of a genius. Colleen smiled.
I've been trying to work up the courage to introduce myself. I even drive by your house sometimes. She giggled and shook her head. Don't worry, I'm not a crazoid stalker. She set her glass down on the floor. Today was fate. I drove by and saw the florist guy walking away from your door. Colleen blinked her eyes slowly. I swung my car into your driveway and told him I was your sister. Said I'd take the flowers inside. I didn't mean any harm. She hung her head. I just wanted you to have that beautiful plant. Don't be mad, okay? I didn't even know you were home.
Bastian withdrew his hand from her cheek and let it travel the length of her arm.
I'm not mad, lassie. You're my Christmas present, all wrapped up in snow.
Colleen smiled and ran a hand over his leg. She held his gaze as she pulled off her gloves, one finger at a time, tugging each tip with her teeth, tossing the gloves and beret to the floor, running a hand through her long brown hair before returning it to his thigh.
I'm sorry you had a bad day.
Her voice sounded like whiskey and cigarettes as she inched closer to him.
I want to hear all about it.
She grinned a wicked tease.
But first, I want to give you another present.
Bastian swallowed hard and repositioned his hips to accommodate the erection that strained his trousers.
It is Christmas, after all.
He reached out to her.
Ah, tut-tut, she whispered. Close your eyes. Lean back. Relax.
Bastian smiled and did as she asked. The fixer brought her hand up to his face and gently placed her fingers against his lips.
"No peeking, okay?" she teased.
You're a shy one, are you? Not too inhibited, I hope.
Bastian kept his eyes shut. The fixer reached down and tugged the loaded syringe free from the surgical tape that secured it to the inside of her rubber boot.
"Not inhibited at all, Dr. Bastian."
She pulled off the orange needle guard and leaned forward.
"Not one little bit."
She teased aside his collar and watched him smile in anticipation of her kiss. She stabbed the syringe into his shoulder, pressed the plunger, and jumped free of the chaise, all before his eyes jerked open.
What the fuck?
Bastian swiped at his shoulder.
Did you bite me?
The fixer smiled from 3 feet away.
"Relax, Dr. Bastian,"
her voice calm and slow. His arms quivered as he grabbed for the side of the chaise.
I can't.
He sounded as though his tongue had tripled in size.
"You can't what, Dr. Bastian?"
Get up? Of course you can't. She held up the empty syringe. Why not just settle back? Bastian's face went slack. His eyes glistened in bewilderment. What's this, you ask? This was 250 milligrams of succinylcholine. The fixer watched the look in his eyes turn to terror as his body went limp. Bastian didn't have the breath to finish the word. His body lay still, his muscular system completely shut down by the powerful drug. Why? Is that your question? You know this drug. You've used it hundreds of times on your animals. You know what's next. Complete muscle paralysis. Full consciousness remaining intact. The fixer recapped the syringe and stuck it back in her boot. First, your striated muscles are paralyzed. You can't move. 60 seconds later, your smooth muscles stop working. No breathing, no heartbeat. That's where you are now. You've got about 90 seconds, Dr. Bastian. 90 seconds to lie in your petrified body and contemplate the fact you're already dead. There's nothing for you to do but close your eyes. The fixer took 2 steps closer and glared down at the helpless man. But you can't close your eyes, can you, Bastian? You're going to watch as your life drains out. Less than a minute now. You're already nothing. The date's been chosen for your obituary. All that terror, and not a thing you can do. Quite an experience, wouldn't you say? The fixer leaned in close. Not unlike the one you gave or two. She straightened and kept her focus on her inert captive. She watched the terror in his frozen eyes, kept her attention fixed until she saw them glaze over. The fixer crossed the room and pulled a pair of latex gloves out of her coat pocket. She snapped them on, picked up her whiskey glass, and went to the kitchen. She cleaned the glass and returned it to its spot in the butler's pantry, swept up the shards of broken glass she found on the kitchen floor, wiped the liquor bottle and put it away, retrieved her winter gloves and hat, and surveyed the room for any trace that she'd been there. Then one last look at the dead man on the chaise. She shrugged into her peacoat, tugged the red beret onto her head, clicked off the table lamp, and left through the same door she'd entered. Chapter 15. Lydia hadn't intended to come to work the day after New Year's, but she was worried after last night's page from her answering service. Savannah Samuels had called, demanding an immediate appointment. Lydia wasn't surprised to see her waiting when she pulled into the parking lot. Lydia walked past and unlocked the door. Savannah shadowed her without a word of greeting, her beauty dulled by a haggard look of exhaustion and a pair of baggy sweatpants. Lydia proceeded to her desk, clicked on lights against the early morning darkness, and slipped a New Year's greeting card from Oliver into her top drawer. Savannah collapsed onto the sofa, curled into a fetal position, and rocked rhythmically against the leather. "Would you like a cup of tea?" Lydia gestured toward the microwave in the waiting room. Savannah kept rocking, her eyes closed, oily hair unwashed and uncombed. Lydia hung her jacket and took a seat opposite her patient. "Savannah," she murmured, "you're here and you're safe. Tell me what has you so upset." Still rocking, Savannah stared into nowhere. Red lines of sleeplessness defiled her electric blue eyes. "I need you to sit up." Lydia's voice was firmer now. "Put your feet on the floor." Savannah's rocking stopped. She blinked several times before dragging herself upright. She took a ragged breath, unzipped her green nylon jacket, and hugged a throw pillow tight against her chest.
Thank you for seeing me, Dr. Corriger. I hope I didn't interrupt your holiday.
"My service said you sounded frantic." Lydia crossed her legs and leaned back into the chair.
I don't know if frantic is the word.
Savannah ran her hands through her dirty hair.
Scared shitless, maybe, but not frantic.
"Savannah, we're not doing this today. We're not playing word games or finding hidden clues." Lydia's voice was clear, strong, and steady. "You're obviously distraught, and you've reached out for help. That's a great first step. But the rule here is you can't ask for help unless you're ready to take it." Savannah stole a glance toward the window before turning her attention to the pillow in her lap.
You haven't a clue who I am, do you?
"You haven't given me much to go on," Lydia said. Savannah looked up at her therapist and slowly shook her head.
It's getting worse, Dr. Corriger. I'm getting worse.
"In what way?" Lydia scanned the full length of her patient's body, registering the entire tableau of her misery. Savannah turned her tear-filled eyes upward.
I'm still hurting people. Good people in bad ways. I lie to myself and say it doesn't matter, that we're all getting what we deserve.
She blinked at her therapist.
But it does matter. People end up ruined, worse, because of me. Last night I couldn't stop thinking about all I've done.
Her laugh was joyless.
You know, reflections on the past, resolutions for the future, all that New Year's Eve bullshit. My past is despicable. I don't see my future being any different. Last night my head was hell-bent on replaying my greatest hits, you know what I mean?
Lydia nodded. We've all had times when we dwell on the mistakes of our past.
But that's just it.
Savannah focused pleading eyes on Lydia.
My mistakes aren't left in the past. The hits just keep on happening. Last night I thought there was only one way out. Only one way to stop myself from hurting people ever again.
Were you thinking about killing yourself? Lydia kept her tone conversational, normalized the thought to keep her talking. Savannah nodded.
Like there was no other move for me, so I called your service. It was either that or put a gun in my mouth.
I'm glad you called. Lydia held herself steady, not adding to the drama. Do you have guns in your home? For the first time that morning, Lydia saw a flash of the polished, in-command Savannah she'd grown accustomed to.
You'd be surprised what I have in my home.
She pulled herself taller.
Yes, I have guns.
Lydia kept quiet for a few moments. She wanted Savannah to watch her think. I promise I will never take the option of suicide away from you. Lydia wanted Savannah's full attention. But I hope you won't do it on an impulse. If you do, you'll never have the chance to know what might come next. You'll never have the chance to see if we could fix whatever it is you seem so convinced is broken. Savannah gave a sour smile.
Where's the red lights and sirens? Aren't you supposed to save me?
If that's what you want, you came to the wrong place. If you want to kill yourself, I won't stop you. I just want to make sure you've explored all your options first. Savannah's tears spilled from bloodshot eyes.
I don't know what to do.
I believe that. Lydia handed her a box of tissues. Let's see if we can work something out together. What do you want to tell me? Savannah blew her nose, tossed the tissue into the wastebasket, and pulled out another.
What I want to say to you is strictly confidential, right? Like you're a priest.
That's right. Unless I need to take steps to keep you or someone else safe, I can't tell a soul. Lydia smiled. Like a priest. Savannah kept her eyes on her hands.
What if I've hurt people? Do you tell?
There's nothing I can do about what's already happened. We can talk about it, learn from it, develop strategies to avoid future mistakes. But no, I can't tell anyone what you've done. Lydia finally sensed a cracking in her patient's wall of mistrust.
What if I robbed a bank?
Savannah asked. We're not playing games, remember? Confidentiality is blanket. It doesn't apply to some things and not others. Lydia quieted her impatience. What is it you've done that has you so ashamed? Savannah stayed focused on her hands.
Remember when I told you I was aware of the effect I had on men? How I used that to my advantage?
I remember. You're a startling beauty, Savannah. You wouldn't be the first woman to use that to get what she needs. Lydia hoped normalizing her patient's behavior would reduce her shame. Savannah looked down at her disheveled clothes and turned a quizzical look to Lydia.
Is that what you see? A startling beauty?
Lydia joined her in a smile. Well, maybe not this morning. Let's just say you clean up real nice. Savannah held Lydia's gaze.
Why don't you, Dr. Corriger?
Why don't I what?
Clean up real nice.
Savannah brought her legs up under her and cocked her head.
No offense, but you dress like a drudge. No makeup, shapeless clothes, hair pulled back in a scrunchie. I see the kind of bone structure you have, those big, beautiful eyes. You could be drop-dead gorgeous in no time.
Lydia's gut clenched. I'll assume you meant that as a compliment. But we're here to talk about you. Tell me how you use your own beauty. Savannah's smile disappeared.
People hire me. Not for sex, though that's often a part of it. I'm not that kind of prostitute.
She huffed in self-loathing.
At least, not anymore.
What kind of prostitute are you?
You really aren't like other shrinks, are you?
The smile, though weary, was back.
I was expecting some sort of comforting words.
When I offer comforting words, you'll know they're sincere. What kind of prostitute are you? Savannah took a deep breath and held it for a few seconds before exhaling through pursed lips.
Just for the sake of argument, pretend that you're the chairman of a major bank, and this bank is about to launch a program of investments that are, let's say, questionable at best. Maybe even unethical or illegal.
Okay. Are you telling me you're a stockbroker?
No, I'm more specialized. Pretend you have a member of your board who's opposed to these investments. Despite the fact that billions of dollars will be made, this board member thinks it's wrong and can't be convinced otherwise. You might hire me to make sure that person isn't available when it comes time to vote.
But if I'm the chairman, why wouldn't I just replace that board member?
Maybe letting him go would raise the kind of questions you don't want splashed across the front page of the Wall Street Journal.
Savannah stared into middle space.
People have their reasons for using me.
Okay, let's stick with your scenario, Lydia said. How might you keep the person from voting? Savannah shrugged.
It's incredibly easy for a beautiful woman to distract a man.
She turned to face Lydia.
Something tells me you know that.
Lydia held her gaze. This is about you. So you distract this fellow. What stops him from crying foul when he learns he's been duped, going public with his dissent and how he was manipulated? Savannah sat motionless and silent for several long moments.
Let's just say he wouldn't want the details of the distraction to be known.
She shredded a tissue into her lap.
The people who hire me always have full documentation of my work.
Blackmail?
At its most benign, yes.
And at its most malignant? Lydia was certain she didn't want to hear the answer. Savannah stared straight ahead.
People die.
Lydia's heartbeat pounded in her ears. Dead, Savannah? By your hands? Savannah blinked and said nothing. Lydia's mind raced. Her training hadn't prepared her for this. How many, Savannah?
Hires or deaths?
Savannah returned her stare into nothingness. Deaths. How many deaths are you responsible for? Lydia felt her breath become rapid and shallow. Tears spilled freely from Savannah's eyes.
Too many, Dr. Corriger. Too many.
Lydia blew out a breath and looked out the window. The sky was beginning to lighten. A heavy fog obstructed any view. When was the most recent? Savannah sat quietly. Lydia wondered if she was contemplating how much more to reveal.
Did you read about that guy at the university? The animal researcher?
She asked.
The one who died right before Christmas.
Lydia raised an eyebrow. Are you talking about Fred Bastian? Her breathing relaxed. Savannah, he died of a heart attack. It was all over the papers.
There's lots of ways to cause a heart attack.
Savannah reached for her jacket.
But whatever the cause, you're just as dead, aren't you? Besides, there are worse things than killing people. Far worse.
Lydia watched her patient stand and cross the room. Savannah, you didn't kill Fred Bastian. Please sit down. Savannah glanced over her shoulder as she walked away.
Not today. I'm exhausted.
She stopped and turned before walking through the door.
Thanks for seeing me. I feel better.
She bit her lower lip to stop its quiver.
And I didn't think that was possible. You've come to my rescue yet again.
Lydia tilted her head. You'll come back. And you'll call me if you feel like hurting yourself, or anyone else. Savannah gave a tentative nod.
I promise. On both counts.
She looked down at the doorknob.
I really would like to see how this turns out.
Lydia bent over, hands on her knees, breathing rapidly. Her morning meeting with Savannah pulled at her, despite her rugged workout regimen. She tried to make sense of the contradictions, but couldn't. Was Bastian's death standing in for some actual guilt Savannah was experiencing? Or was it all a game? Lydia recalled her first meeting with the beautiful stranger. Savannah promised lies and conundrums. She challenged Lydia to make sense of the nonsensical. Lydia grabbed a towel and wiped the sweat off her neck. Something about Savannah nagged in the back of her mind. She'd overlooked something major. She glanced at the clock on the basement wall.